Think about the America you know from history books and postcards, the icons that define this vast country. The Statue of Liberty raising her torch in New York Harbor, the White House standing proud in Washington, the Golden Gate Bridge arching over the Pacific. These landmarks feel permanent, etched not just into the land but into our collective memory. Yet what if I told you that the ground beneath our feet holds secrets far older and stranger than these familiar symbols? That for every monument still standing, there are dozens that have disappeared, swallowed by time, nature, or human hands. Places that once drew crowds, inspired awe, and shaped communities now vanished without a trace. Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover these ghost sites, 30 forgotten American landmarks that no longer exist. From theme parks reclaimed by forests to grand hotels lost to fire, from mystical caves sealed shut to entire neighborhoods erased from maps, each of these places has a story waiting to be rediscovered. You're about to step into a hidden layer of American history, one where memory fades and geography shifts, and where the past isn't always preserved. Sometimes it's just waiting to be found again. So settle in, open your mind, and let's explore the shadows of a nation's forgotten wonders. Our journey begins not with an ancient ruin or a remote natural wonder, but in the very heart of modern America, New York City. Long before the arena we know today bore the name, the original Madison Square Garden stood as a breathtaking palace of entertainment, a symbol of the Gilded Age's boundless ambition. Designed by the renowned architect Stanford White, this architectural marvel opened its doors in 1890. It was a sight to behold, a spectacular example of Moorish revival design with its distinctive minarets and a 300-foot-tall tower crowned by a statue of the goddess Diana, which became an instant landmark on the city's skyline. But the true magic happened inside and on top of this incredible structure. The garden wasn't just a sports arena, it was a multi-tiered universe of leisure. Its interior hosted everything from thrilling 6-day bicycle races and championship boxing matches to massive political conventions that shaped the nation. It was the chosen stage for P.T. Barnum's greatest show on earth, filling the vast space with the sounds and smells of the circus. Yet perhaps its most legendary feature was the rooftop restaurant and theater, a lavish space conceived by Stanford White himself. This open-air oasis, high above the bustling streets, became the epicenter of New York high society. The elite would gather there for fine dining and spectacular theatrical performances under the stars, with the illuminated figure of Diana spinning gracefully in the breeze above them. It was the place to see and be seen, a testament to an era of opulence and public spectacle. Ironically, the man who created this temple of pleasure met a tragic end within its walls. Stanford White was murdered on the garden's rooftop in 1906 in a crime that scandalized the nation. For 35 years, the garden was the heart of New York's cultural and social life, but the relentless march of progress demanded its sacrifice. By the 1920s, the value of the land beneath it far exceeded the value of the building itself. In 1925, despite public outcry from those who saw it as an irreplaceable treasure, the magnificent Moorish palace was demolished to make way for the new, soaring Art Deco headquarters of the New York Life Insurance Company. The goddess Diana was removed, and an iconic piece of the city's soul was erased, proving that even the grandest monuments are not immune to the demands of a changing world. Just a few blocks from where the original Madison Square Garden once dazzled, another New York titan rose to even greater heights, only to suffer a similar and even more shocking fate. In the first decade of the 20th century, the skyline was a battlefield of corporate egos, a vertical race for prestige. And in 1908, the Singer Manufacturing Company, famous for its sewing machines, won that race decisively. Their new headquarters, the Singer Building, soared an astonishing 612 feet into the air, claiming the title of the world's tallest building. But its height was only part of the story. Designed by the architect Ernest Flagg, the building was a masterpiece of the Beaux Arts style, an opulent celebration of turn-of-the-century confidence and craftsmanship. Its base was a monumental 12-story palazzo, clad in gleaming terracotta and granite, with grand arched windows and ornate decoration that made it feel more like a civic palace than an office building. And then, rising from the center of this massive block was its most breathtaking feature, a perfectly slender 41-story tower. This was a radical departure from the bulky skyscrapers of the era. It tapered elegantly, culminating in a magnificent domed cupola and a final, brilliant lantern that glowed like a beacon over the city. For a brief, glorious moment, this graceful giant was the uncontested monarch of the urban landscape, a symbol of American architectural daring and corporate pride. It held its title for less than a year before being surpassed, but it remained a beloved and defining feature of Lower Manhattan for decades. Its observation deck drew countless visitors who marveled at the breathtaking views of the harbor and the growing city. Yet, the very qualities that made it an icon, its relatively small floor plates in the narrow tower, and its incredibly ornate, maintenance-heavy design sealed its doom in the eyes of post-war developers. In a decision that still stuns architectural historians, the Singer Building was deemed inefficient and obsolete. The land it sat on was deemed more valuable than the landmark itself. And so, in 1968, just 60 years after its triumphant completion, the wrecking balls moved in. The demolition was methodical and utterly heartbreaking, a process captured in haunting photographs that show the elegant tower being eaten away floor by floor. When it was finally gone, the Singer Building held a tragic new record. It became the tallest structure in the world to be deliberately demolished. Its destruction was a seismic wake-up call, a moment that galvanized the historic preservation movement and forced a city and a nation to question what it chooses to value and what it so casually throws away. The site is now occupied by a far larger but utterly anonymous black steel and glass skyscraper, a stark, silent reminder of the magnificent beauty that was sacrificed for pure, unadorned profit. If the Singer Building's demise was a blow to architectural history, the story of our next landmark is a heartbreaking loss for the world of spectacle and pure imagination. Just a short walk from the sites of those fallen giants stood a palace of dreams so vast, so audacious, it defied belief, the legendary Hippodrome Theater. When its doors opened in 1905, it wasn't merely a new venue, it was a statement. Boasting a staggering seating capacity of over 5,300 people, it was crowned the largest theater in the world, a colossus of entertainment built on a scale that seems almost impossible today. Its facade was a grand Beaux Arts confection, but the real magic was locked inside. The stage itself was a technological marvel, a massive proscenium arch 100 feet wide, hiding secrets that would leave audiences gasping. The most incredible feature was an enormous water tank holding thousands of gallons that could rise from below the stage or descend into it, allowing for aquatic spectacles unlike anything ever seen. And the shows were the stuff of pure, unadulterated fantasy. This was the era of the spectacle, and the Hippodrome was its undisputed king. Imagine sitting in that vast auditorium as the curtains parted to reveal a full-scale circus, with live elephants, camels, and performing horses parading across the stage. Or witnessing the breathtaking diving sensation Annette Kellerman, the original $1 Million Mermaid, perform aquatic ballets in that magnificent tank. One of its most famous productions, A Yankee Circus on Mars, literally launched performers on wires over the heads of the mesmerized crowd. It was a place where the boundaries of reality seemed to dissolve, where elephants swam and ballerinas flew. For decades, it was the epicenter of American popular entertainment, a must-see destination that defined Times Square long before the bright lights of Broadway took over. But the world changed. The colossal cost of mounting such enormous productions, combined with the rise of cinema and the economic crush of the Great Depression, began to drain the life from the giant. The lavish spectacles that were its raison d'etre became financially unsustainable. It tried to adapt, hosting vaudeville revues and even becoming a venue for the immensely popular Billy Rose's Aquacade, but the magic was fading. The final curtain fell not with a spectacular aquatic finale, but with a whimper. In 1939, the owners admitted defeat. The magnificent Hippodrome, a building designed to house elephants and diving horses, was deemed less valuable than the empty space it occupied. It was unceremoniously demolished to make way for a parking garage. The sheer mundanity of its replacement became a symbol of cultural loss, a stark exchange of wonder for utility. Today, a bland glass office building stands on the site, housing a bank. There's no plaque, no grand memorial to the palace of dreams that once made thousands believe in the impossible every single night. It's a silent testament to an uncomfortable truth that even our greatest temples of joy are not permanent, and that sometimes progress simply means making room for more cars. If the Hippodrome's end was a sad trade of spectacle for a parking lot, the story of Pennsylvania Station is perhaps the most infamous and consequential act of architectural loss in American history. Its destruction didn't just remove a building, it fundamentally changed how a nation views its own heritage. To understand the magnitude of this loss, you have to picture the station not as a mere transit hub, but as a grand civic gateway. Designed by the legendary architectural firm McKim, Mead and White, the same team behind the original Madison Square Garden, the station opened in 1910. It was conceived not as a simple place to catch a train, but as a monumental entryway into America's greatest city, a statement of confidence and grandeur for the millions of immigrants and travelers arriving by rail. From the outside, its presence was overwhelming. The facade was a breathtaking 100-foot-tall colonnade of pink granite, inspired by the Brandenburg Gate, stretching along 2 full city blocks. It was a majestic, imposing sight that communicated the importance of the journey within. But nothing could prepare a visitor for the experience of stepping inside. The main waiting room was the heart of the masterpiece, a cavernous space of almost sublime proportions. It was modeled after the Roman baths of Caracalla, a direct link to the eternal grandeur of classical antiquity. The room soared 150 feet to a vaulted, coffered ceiling, with sunlight pouring in from enormous arched windows that filled the space with a celestial glow. The walls were made of travertine marble, shipped all the way from Italy, and massive, elegant Corinthian columns stood as silent sentinels around the room's perimeter. This was not a place designed for hurried, anxious travel. It was a palace of transition, meant to ennoble every person who passed through it, from the wealthiest industrialist to the newest arrival to American shores. For over 5 decades, it served this purpose with unparalleled dignity. But the mid-20th century brought the decline of long-distance rail travel. The Pennsylvania Railroad Company, facing financial strain, saw the immense value not in the landmark itself, but in the air right above its sunken train yards. The maintenance on the colossal, ornate building was immense, and in a move driven purely by short-term economics, the company decided to demolish its crown jewel and replace it with a new, revenue-generating sports arena and office tower. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Architects, historians, and everyday citizens protested in the streets and in the courts, but they were too late and lacked the legal tools to stop it. The demolition began in 1963, and it was a brutal, drawn-out affair. The magnificent statues were removed, the acres of pink granite were carted away as rubble, and the majestic waiting room was systematically stripped and dismantled. The profound sense of loss was captured perfectly by the New York Times editorial that famously declared, "One entered the city like a god, one scuttles in now like a rat." This act of cultural vandalism, however, was not in vain. The sheer, gut-wrenching outrage it generated created a powerful and immediate backlash. The destruction of Penn Station is directly credited with birthing the modern historic preservation movement. It led to the creation of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965, an organization tasked with protecting the city's architectural heritage from such a fate ever happening again. Its first major success was helping to save Grand Central Terminal from a similar proposed redevelopment. So, while the original Penn Station is gone, its ghost haunts every preservation battle fought since. Its legacy is a painful lesson etched into the soul of the city, that once we tear down our history, we can never truly get it back, but its loss can sometimes be the very thing that teaches us how to save what remains. Leaving behind the grand civic monuments of New York, our journey takes us south to Baltimore, where a very different kind of landmark once stood, a structure built not for art or entertainment, but for the precise, deadly science of war. In the early 19th century, as the young United States was expanding and its military needs growing, the demand for ammunition was constant, and one building provided it in a most ingenious and almost magical way: the Baltimore Shot Tower. Completed in 1828, this was a marvel of early American industrial engineering. It soared 234 feet into the air, a stark, imposing cylinder of brick that was for a time the tallest structure in the entire United States. But its true wonder was hidden inside and defined its singular purpose. This was a factory in a tower designed for one specific task: the manufacturing of perfectly spherical lead shot for muskets and pistols. The process was as dangerous as it was brilliant. Workers would haul massive quantities of lead to the very top of the tower, melting it in a large, fierce furnace. Once the lead was a bubbling, molten liquid, it would be poured through a large iron pan perforated with small holes like a colossal salt shaker. As the liquid lead dripped through these holes, it would naturally form into tiny, perfect spheres during its long, uninterrupted free fall down the immense hollow center of the tower. By the time these droplets reached the bottom, they had cooled and solidified into hardened, flawless balls. They would land in a large vat of water at the tower's base, which cushioned their landing and completed the cooling process. The result was ammunition of exceptional consistency and quality, vital for the accuracy of the smoothbore muskets of the era. For nearly a century, this brick sentinel operated, producing millions of rounds of ammunition that would have been used by soldiers, hunters, and frontiersmen across the expanding nation. It was a unique and critical piece of the country's industrial backbone, a physical representation of American ingenuity applied to a very practical and very violent need. Its architecture was purely functional: thick walls to contain the heat and process, and a stunning height that was an absolute requirement for its operation. It stood as a proud, soot-stained monument to an era of making things, but time and progress rendered its unique technology obsolete. New methods for manufacturing shot were developed that didn't require such a colossal and singular structure. The tower ceased its industrial operations and fell silent. For a few years, it found a new life as a billboard, its towering height making it a prime advertising location, a somewhat sad but practical repurposing. Its final fate, however, was not to be a relic. In the automobile age of the early 1920s, the city of Baltimore decided it needed to widen the surrounding streets to accommodate growing traffic. The Shot Tower, this unique artifact of the Industrial Revolution, was seen not as a landmark to be preserved, but as an obstruction to be removed. And so, in 1921, despite its historical significance and its status as one of the last remaining shot towers in the country, it was demolished. The bricks that once housed a fiery, precise manufacturing process were unceremoniously carted away to make room for pavement. It was a trade of a unique piece of the past for a few more feet of asphalt, a reminder that progress often clears away the physical evidence of how we once lived and worked, leaving only stories where towering ingenuity once stood. From the industrial pragmatism of the Baltimore Shot Tower, we now travel across the continent to a place where ambition met the sublime power of nature, the very edge of the American West. Perched dramatically on a rocky headland where the Pacific Ocean relentlessly pounds the San Francisco coastline, there once stood a palace of leisure so audacious it seemed to defy both gravity and convention. This was the second and grandest incarnation of the Cliff House, a magnificent 7-story Victorian chateau that became synonymous with the extravagant vision of one man, Adolphe Sutro. A former mayor of San Francisco who made a vast fortune in silver mining, Sutro wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a visionary who believed in creating public spectacles on a monumental scale. After the more modest first Cliff House burned down in 1894, Sutro saw not a tragedy but a blank canvas. He embarked on an ambitious project to rebuild it not just as a restaurant, but as the centerpiece of a vast public amusement empire. The structure that opened in 1896 was nothing short of breathtaking. It was a sprawling, turreted confection of spires, domes, and gingerbread trim, all clinging precariously to the cliffs of Sutro Heights. With its 7 stories and countless windows, it offered every guest a front-row seat to the spectacle of the ocean, but to call it merely a restaurant would be a profound understatement. It was a self-contained universe of entertainment. Inside, visitors could explore a world-class museum featuring artifacts Sutro had collected from his global travels, from Egyptian mummies to exotic taxidermy. They could dine in opulent restaurants, dance in grand ballrooms, or simply wander the many verandas, feeling the salt spray on their faces as they watched ships navigate the treacherous waters of the Golden Gate. The most thrilling attraction was the observatory tower, which offered a 360-degree panoramic view that was simply unsurpassed anywhere, a dizzying vista of the endless Pacific, the bustling city, and the wild Marin headlands. The Cliff House was more than a building. It was the glittering social heart of San Francisco, drawing everyone from presidents and royalty to everyday families who arrived via Sutro's own railway line. It represented the absolute pinnacle of Gilded Age excess and public generosity, a place where anyone could experience a taste of unparalleled luxury and grandeur. For 11 glorious years, it stood as a testament to this dream. But on a fateful evening in September 1907, a simple spark in the basement electrical plant ignited a catastrophe. Fanned by the relentless ocean winds, the fire quickly became an inferno. The very wooden intricacy that made the building so beautiful, its countless turrets, gables, and decorative flourishes, became an unimaginable feast for the flames. The blaze was so intense and the location so remote that fire crews could only watch in horror from a distance as the palace was utterly consumed. By the next morning, all that remained of Adolphe Sutro's magnificent dream was a smoldering heap of blackened timbers and twisted metal against the gray sky. The loss was devastating, not just architecturally but spiritually. It felt like the end of an era of boundless, flamboyant optimism for San Francisco. While a third, more fireproof Cliff House would eventually be built on the site, it was a far more subdued structure, lacking the fantastical whimsy and overwhelming grandeur of its predecessor. The burning of the great Victorian Cliff House marked the irrevocable closing of a chapter, a fiery farewell to a time when San Francisco believed it could build anything, even a fairy tale castle at the very edge of the world. While the Cliff House represented a grand dream lost to fire, our next landmark was a vision of the future that was deliberately buried alive, hidden from the world by the corrupt politics of its era. To find it, we return to the streets of New York, but this time we must descend beneath them. Long before the rumbling subways of today moved millions, a brilliant inventor named Alfred Ely Beach had a radical idea to solve the city's notorious traffic congestion. His solution was not to build more roads on the crowded surface, but to create a new world underneath it. In 1870, using his own funds and a clever bit of deception, Beach achieved the impossible. He secured a permit to build a small postal tube system under Broadway, but that was just a cover story. In secret, working only at night, his crews tunneled out a much larger passage, a single block long from Warren Street to Murray Street. What they created down there was nothing short of miraculous. This was the Beach Pneumatic Transit, America's very first subway, but this was no dank, dark tunnel. Beach was a showman as much as an engineer, and he understood that to win over a skeptical public, the experience had to be wondrous. The station he built was more like a luxurious waiting room from a fine hotel, complete with elegant furniture, a grand piano, a goldfish pond, and even a dazzling crystal chandelier that glittered under the glow of zirconia lighting. The centerpiece was the passenger car itself, a beautiful plushly upholstered carriage that could comfortably seat 22 people. The propulsion system was the true stroke of genius. There were no noisy, soot-belching steam engines. Instead, Beach harnessed the power of air. A massive, revolutionary rotary fan, nicknamed the Western Tornado, was housed in a separate room. To move the car down the tunnel, the fan would be powered up, blowing a tremendous gust of air behind it, literally pushing the vehicle along its tracks on a cushion of air. To bring it back, the fan's mechanism was reversed, creating a powerful vacuum that sucked the car smoothly back to the station. It was silent, clean, and utterly futuristic. For a small fee, the public could experience this marvel, and they were utterly enchanted. It was an immediate sensation, a proof of concept that worked flawlessly. Beach dreamed of expanding his pneumatic railway into a city-wide network, a vision of a quiet, efficient, and modern metropolis. But his dream ran headlong into a immovable object of corruption, the political machine of William "Boss" Tweed. Tweed and his Tammany Hall cronies had a hugely profitable stake in the city's surface railroads and horsecar lines. A successful underground system would shatter their monopoly and, more importantly, their enormous stream of bribes and kickbacks. Using his corrupt influence, Tweed blocked every legislative attempt Beach made to secure the necessary permits for expansion. The brilliantly functional subway was doomed not by engineering failure but by political graft. After only 3 years of operation, the public demonstration was shut down. Following the financial panic of 1873 and the eventual fall of the Tweed Ring, Beach finally got his charter, but it was too late. Funding had dried up. The beautiful station was sealed up and forgotten, becoming a ghost beneath the feet of a bustling city, its very existence fading into urban legend. For decades, it was rumored to be down there, a secret waiting to be rediscovered. It wasn't until 1912, during excavation work for the modern Bibby subway line, that workers broke through a wall and stumbled into the long-lost station. The elegant waiting room was dusty, and the pneumatic car was still sitting on its tracks, a perfectly preserved time capsule of a future that never was. It was briefly exposed to the awe of a new generation before being dismantled to make way for progress. The Beach Pneumatic Transit remains one of history's most tantalizing what-ifs, a silent testament to how a brilliant idea, no matter how elegant or promising, can be suffocated not by a lack of imagination, but by the grim weight of greed and power. From the secret tunnels of New York, we journey next to the shores of Lake Michigan, where an entire city of pure fantasy once materialized, dazzling the world before vanishing as if it were a mirage. The year was 1893, and Chicago was determined to prove it had risen from the ashes of its great fire to become a beacon of American progress. The world's Columbian Exposition was its stage, and the set it built was nothing less than miraculous, the White City. This was not a nickname given lightly, it was a literal description. Under the guidance of legendary architects like Daniel Burnham and Frederick Law Olmsted, a 600-acre swamp was transformed into a vision of utopian perfection. The fair's central court was a breathtaking ensemble of grand neoclassical buildings, all unified in design and all coated in a dazzling mixture of white plaster and hemp fiber. Under the sun, they gleamed with an ethereal brightness, and at night they were illuminated by thousands of the newly invented electric lights, creating a spectacle of such overwhelming beauty that visitors were often moved to tears. This was a city of canals and lagoons where graceful gondolas glided past majestic colonnades, all leading to the towering centerpiece, the first ever Ferris wheel. Designed by George Washington Gale Ferris Jr., as a response to the Eiffel Tower, it was an engineering marvel of its own, standing 264 feet tall and carrying over 2,000 passengers at a time in its 36 wooden cars, offering a view of the entire temporary empire below. For 6 glorious months, the White City was the most famous place on Earth, a symbol of American ingenuity, optimism, and cultural arrival. It introduced the world to wonders like Cracker Jack, the moving sidewalk, and the hamburger. It profoundly influenced a generation of architects, inspiring the City Beautiful movement that would shape the look of American downtowns for decades, with its emphasis on grand boulevards, monumental civic centers, and integrated green spaces. But the most powerful illusion of the White City was its own permanence. Those magnificent, fireproof-looking buildings of marble and granite were, in cruel reality, nothing more than temporary shells. Their frames were made of inexpensive wood and steel, and their stunning white exteriors were merely a staff plaster facade, a mixture of plaster and jute that could be sculpted into beautiful details but was frighteningly flammable. The entire glorious city was, in essence, a magnificent stage set. Almost immediately after the fair closed, the fate of this dreamscape was sealed. While a few structures, like the Palace of Fine Arts, were rebuilt in more permanent materials to survive, the vast majority of the White City was left to decay. The area, largely abandoned, became a dangerous and desolate place. Then, in the winter of 1894, a series of devastating fires broke out. With the firefighting equipment that had been so proudly displayed at the fair now gone, the flames raged unchecked. They consumed the great domes, the colonnades, and the palaces with terrifying speed, reducing the embodiment of human achievement to heaps of smoldering ash and twisted metal. The very material that had made the city so brilliantly white now fueled its destruction. The Ferris wheel stood for a few more years, moved to another location, but it too was eventually dismantled and sold for scrap. The White City, which had drawn 27 million visitors and shown them a perfected future, was utterly erased, leaving behind only photographs, memories, and a profound lesson on the fragile line between a dream and its dissolution. It remains one of history's most poignant metaphors, a vision of perfection built to be temporary, whose beauty was only matched by its inevitable vulnerability. Following the utopian dreams of the White City and the political machinations that suffocated a subway, our story takes a turn toward the pure, unadulterated thrill-seeking of the 1920s. This was the Jazz Age, a time of unprecedented optimism and a collective hunger for spectacle and speed. And on the cliffs of the New Jersey Palisades overlooking the Hudson River, an amusement park named Palisades Amusement Park was in its heyday, competing fiercely with Coney Island for the title of America's most dazzling playground. It was here that one of the most audacious and utterly bizarre rides ever conceived made its debut, courtesy of a true American pioneer, Glenn Curtiss. Curtiss was a legend of early aviation, a motorcycle speed king, and an inventor who seemed to operate without the constraints of fear. In the early 1920s, he turned his engineering genius toward entertainment, creating something he called the aquaboard. To the average park-goer, it must have looked less like a ride and more like a dare. The setup was deceptively simple, yet terrifying in its implications. Curtiss constructed a massive, steeply inclined wooden ramp that started high up on the park grounds and extended out over a man-made lagoon. The ride involved a performer, often a skilled water skier or a brave stuntperson, who would be pulled at high speed up this slick, sloping ramp by a powerful winch and cable system. They would be riding on a single, wide ski, the eponymous aquaboard. The climax of the act was as inevitable as it was heart-stopping. As the rider reached the very end of the ramp, they would be catapulted into the air, soaring for a breathtaking moment before crashing down into the water of the lagoon below. It was part water skiing exhibition, part human catapult, and entirely insane by modern safety standards. For audiences jaded by roller coasters and carousels, the aquaboard was a revolutionary jolt of adrenaline. It was a perfect spectacle for the era, embodying the 20s obsession with speed, danger, and the audacity of human flight. The connection to Glenn Curtiss, an aviation hero, lent it an air of technological credibility. This wasn't just a carnival stunt, it was applied science for the sake of spectacle. Crowds would gather around the lagoon, necks craned, to watch these modern-day Icaruses defy gravity, if only for a second before their watery landing. The act was a huge draw, a unique signature attraction that set Palisades Park apart. Yet, the very factors that made it so captivating also sealed its fate. The margin for error was incredibly thin. The speed of the winch, the angle of the ramp, and the skill of the performer had to be in perfect harmony to avoid a catastrophic mislaunch that could send a rider crashing into the ramp itself or landing painfully short in the shallow water. While there are no widely publicized records of serious injuries, the inherent risk was palpable and likely a constant concern for the park's management. Furthermore, the novelty inevitably wore off. As the public's appetite for thrills evolved, they began to seek more interactive experiences. The aquaboard was a show, something you watched. The new generation of amusement park rides, like faster roller coasters and spinning attractions, were things you experienced firsthand. By the late 1920s, the crowds for the aquaboard had likely diminished, and the financial and logistical burden of maintaining such a specialized, high-risk stunt show became difficult to justify. Sometime before the Great Depression would forever change the landscape of American leisure, the aquaboard was quietly retired. The ramp was dismantled, the lagoon was likely filled in or repurposed, and all physical evidence of Glenn Curtiss's bizarre flying machine vanished from the park. Unlike the grand architectural losses we've chronicled, the aquaboard's disappearance wasn't met with public outcry. It was simply a fad that had run its course, a peculiar and thrilling footnote in the history of amusement that was discarded when the next big thing came along. It exists now only in grainy photographs and newspaper clippings, a testament to a time when entertainment was a live, dangerous, and wonderfully unpredictable affair. While the aquaboard was a fleeting spectacle of daredevilry, our next landmark represents an ambition of a far grander and more permanent scale, an entire transportation network that was fully built but never once used, a ghost train waiting forever in the dark. This is the story of the Cincinnati subway, America's largest and most complete abandoned subway system, a monumental public works project that became a $20 million tomb. The dream began in the early 1900s as American cities were racing to modernize. Cincinnati, a booming industrial hub cramped between its 7 hills and the Ohio River, was choking on its own success. Its streets were a chaotic tangle of streetcars, automobiles, and horse-drawn wagons. City planners looked to Boston and New York and saw the future, rapid transit running underground, free from the gridlock above. A plan was hatched to not only build a subway but to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by utilizing the bed of the old Miami and Erie Canal, which had been covered over and converted into a central sewer line. The project was a masterpiece of civic engineering ambition. Ground was broken in January 1920, and for the next 5 years, crews worked tirelessly under the streets of the city. They constructed over 2 miles of wide, perfectly engineered tunnels, each large enough to accommodate 2 full-sized trains running side by side. They built 4 beautiful, fully completed stations, their vaulted ceilings and elegant tilework echoing the grandeur of the New York City subway stations that served as their inspiration. These were not rough-hewn caverns, they were finished public spaces complete with stairwells, elevator shafts, and spaces for ticket booths, all waiting for the crowds that would never come. By 1925, the tunnels were essentially complete. The only things missing were the tracks, the electrical systems, and the trains themselves. And that's where the dream stalled, then died. The project's initial estimates had been catastrophically optimistic. As construction progressed, costs began to balloon, driven upward by post-World War I inflation and the immense technical challenges of rerouting utility lines and shoring up foundations. The political will that had launched the project began to evaporate. The city's automobilist lobby, growing in power and influence, argued that the future was in roads and bridges, not in expensive and disruptive rail projects. Most damningly, the original funding plan had been tied to a pay-as-you-go model, meaning the city could only spend what it had on hand. When the money ran out, the work simply stopped. There were several attempts to secure additional bonds to finish the job, but each time the voters said no. The Great Depression delivered the final blow, emptying the city's coffers and ensuring that any remaining funds would be directed toward relief, not a half-finished subway. And so, this incredible piece of infrastructure, this fully built, ready-to-use subterranean railroad, was simply sealed up and forgotten. For decades, it has sat in a state of perfect preservation and utter uselessness, a concrete and steel monument to what might have been. It has become a legendary site for urban explorers who braved dark, flooded passages to catch a glimpse of the ghost stations, their walls still adorned with faded construction markings from a century ago. The city has occasionally looked at this white elephant beneath its feet with a mixture of curiosity and frustration. Proposals have ranged from the practical, converting it into an underground roadway or a utility corridor, to the fantastical, like turning the stations into a unique retail arcade or a vast data storage facility. But the costs of any meaningful repurposing have always been prohibitive. The tunnels, while structurally sound, are now hemmed in by a modern city built on top of them, with deep foundations for skyscrapers and a labyrinth of newer utilities making access and renovation a logistical nightmare. The Cincinnati subway remains frozen in time, a silent, dry, and dark reminder of a crossroads where a city chose one path and left a perfectly good other path to gather dust. It is a unique kind of landmark, not one that was lost to demolition or disaster, but one that never truly lived, a skeleton of a future that arrived everywhere else but never made it to Cincinnati. Rising from the fertile plains of western Illinois, a gleaming white edifice of astonishing beauty and ambition once stood as a beacon of faith and community. This was the original Nauvoo Temple, constructed between 1841 and 1846 by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who were then commonly known as Mormons. After being violently driven from their previous settlements in Missouri, the Latter-day Saints, under the leadership of their prophet Joseph Smith, found refuge in the swampy peninsula of Commerce, Illinois. They drained the marshes, built a city, and renamed it Nauvoo, a word derived from Hebrew meaning to be beautiful. And at the heart of this beautiful place, both literally and spiritually, was their temple. It was designed to be the grandest building in the entire state, a powerful statement of their permanence and their devotion. Architecturally, it was a stunning fusion of styles that defied easy categorization. Built of gleaming white limestone quarried locally, its most distinctive feature was a series of 30 pilasters that ran around its entire exterior, each capped with a unique carved capital depicting a rising sun, a full moon, or a descending star, celestial symbols deeply significant to their theology. Atop the structure sat a majestic tower crowned with a weather vane in the shape of an angel, known as the Angel Moroni, sounding a trumpet. The interior was just as elaborate, featuring a large baptismal font supported by 12 carved oxen, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and a series of specialized rooms for sacred ordinances that were central to their worship. For the saints, the temple was the absolute centerpiece of their spiritual and communal life, a literal house of God and the culmination of their incredible efforts to build a Zion, a utopian society of the faithful. However, the very success and rapid growth of Nauvoo became a source of intense fear and suspicion among their non-Mormon neighbors in surrounding Hancock County. The Latter-day Saints, voted as a unified bloc, wielded significant political power, and their practice of plural marriage or polygamy, though initially secret, fueled wild rumors and moral outrage. Tensions escalated into open hostility, with skirmishes, arrests, and the printing of a newspaper dedicated to exposing the church's secrets. This climaxed in June of 1844, when Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were jailed in the nearby town of Carthage. On June 27th, an armed mob with blackened faces stormed the jail and murdered both men, making Joseph Smith a martyr for his faith. This act of violence shattered any hope of peaceful coexistence. The Saints, now led by Brigham Young, knew they would have to abandon their beautiful city and seek refuge far beyond the borders of the United States. Through 1845 and into 1846, they worked feverishly to complete the temple's interior, desperate to receive the sacred blessings inside its walls before their exodus began. The first groups left Nauvoo in the bitter cold of February 1846, beginning the long, treacherous trek west that would eventually lead them to the Great Salt Lake Valley. The temple they left behind was a heartbreaking symbol of a dream sacrificed. It stood largely empty for just over a year, a magnificent ghost overlooking the Mississippi River. Then, in October 1848, an arsonist set the building ablaze. The fire gutted the exquisite interior, leaving only the scorched limestone walls standing against the sky. The ruin stood for another 2 years, a haunting monument to the conflict, until a tornado swept through in 1850 and toppled most of the remaining walls. The stone was eventually carted away by locals to be used in other buildings, and the site was largely forgotten for generations. The story of the Nauvoo Temple is one of the most poignant in American history, a tale of profound faith, violent persecution, and the heartbreaking abandonment of a sacred space. Its physical destruction was the final, brutal period at the end of a sentence, ensuring that the Saints could never return to the home they had built. It would be over a century and a half later, in 2002, that the temple would be meticulously reconstructed on its original footprint, a gesture of reconciliation and remembrance, but the original, a testament to pioneer sacrifice and a flashpoint of American religious conflict, exists now only in memory, drawings, and the faded scars of history. While the Cincinnati subway lay dormant and forgotten, other cities built grand public palaces above ground, designed to showcase their achievements to the world. In Pittsburgh, the Steel City, at the heart of America's Industrial Revolution, this ambition took physical form in a spectacular series of structures known as the Pittsburgh Exposition Halls. Rising on the north shore of the Allegheny River, directly opposite the city's bustling Golden Triangle, these were not single buildings but an entire campus dedicated to spectacle and industry. The first and grandest of these was the massive Romanesque Revival Hall built in 1889, a monument to brick and terracotta that stretched for over 600 feet along the riverbank. It was conceived as Pittsburgh's answer to the great exhibition halls of London and Chicago, a permanent venue to display the jaw-dropping output of the region's steel mills, glassworks, and factories. The scale was almost incomprehensible. Its main hall was a single, uninterrupted space under a vast arched roof, large enough to contain multiple full-sized locomotives, industrial boilers, and even entire bridge spans, all arranged in a dazzling display of mechanical might. This was a temple of production where the soot and sweat of the mills were polished into a brilliant spectacle of progress. For over 6 decades, the exposition halls were the epicenter of civic life. They hosted the National Republican Convention in 1904 and the Democratic Convention in 1936, where Franklin D. Roosevelt was nominated for his second term. But its true heart was the annual Pittsburgh Exposition, a sprawling trade show and public festival that drew millions. For a few weeks each year, the cavernous space transformed into a dreamland. Families would wander wide-eyed past the latest inventions, watch live demonstrations of machinery, and be entertained by spectacular stage shows and concerts. It was a place where the people of Pittsburgh could literally see the fruits of their labor, a tangible celebration of the work that built the city and the nation. The complex even expanded to include a music hall and a lavish outdoor garden for open-air concerts, making it a complete cultural destination. However, the very industry it celebrated would contribute to its downfall. The same steel production that filled its halls with exhibits also blanketed the city in grime and pollution, and the buildings, like everything in Pittsburgh, were constantly coated in a layer of black soot. As the 20th century progressed, the nature of industry and entertainment began to change. The great industrial expositions lost their novelty, overshadowed by radio, cinema, and eventually television. The buildings themselves, monumental as they were, began to show their age and seemed increasingly outdated in the sleek, modern post-war world. The final blow came from a new vision for American cities' urban renewal. In the mid-20th century, Pittsburgh embarked on a massive effort to reinvent itself, clearing away what was seen as old and dilapidated to make way for new highways, parks, and modern developments. The sprawling exposition halls, despite their history and grandeur, were deemed obsolete. They occupied incredibly valuable riverfront land that was seen as critical to the city's new identity. There was no grand fire or dramatic collapse. Their end was a deliberate, bureaucratic decision. In 1951, the wrecking balls arrived, reducing the ornate brick palaces to piles of rubble. In their place rose the Three Rivers Stadium and a vast parking lot, a pragmatic exchange of a multi-purpose civic hub for a single-use sports arena. The demolition of the exposition halls was more than just the loss of a building. It was the erasure of a primary stage where Pittsburgh performed its identity for the world. A physical memory of its industrial soul cleared away for the promise of a cleaner, but perhaps less distinctive future. But if the White City was a temporary utopia and Palisades Park a playground of daredevils, then Dreamland was Coney Island's absolute pinnacle of fantasy, a place where the wonder wasn't just an attraction, it was the very air you breathed. When it opened in 1904, it was the newest and most ambitious of the three great amusement parks that made Coney Island the world's capital of thrills, a direct competitor to the established Steeplechase Park and Luna Park. But Dreamland's creator, a powerful political figure named William H. Reynolds, wasn't interested in competing. He intended to dominate. His vision was to build not merely an amusement park, but a cohesive, immaculate world of pure imagination. And so, he commissioned a staggering design directive. Every single building, ride, and structure within its 15-acre footprint was to be painted a brilliant, gleaming white. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a declaration of purity and grandeur. And then, as if to truly prove his point, he had over 1 million electric light bulbs installed throughout the park. As dusk fell, a technician would throw a single master switch, and Dreamland would erupt into a breathtaking city of light, a dazzling beacon visible for miles out at sea, putting even the electric show of its rival Luna Park to utter shame. It was a statement of opulence so bold it seemed to defy reality itself. The park's entrance set the tone for the wonders within, a massive, triumphal arch crowned by a sculpture of a woman and a young boy riding a winged beetle, all illuminated to ethereal perfection. Once inside, visitors were transported into a realm of meticulously crafted spectacle. You could witness the epic end-of-the-world show, a biblical extravaganza depicting the destruction of Babylon with terrifyingly realistic effects. Or you could be one of the first humans to experience space travel on the Trip to the Moon ride, which simulated a voyage aboard an airship with rocking motions, blowing air, and panoramic views of a receding Earth and an approaching lunar landscape, complete with dancing moon maidens upon arrival. But perhaps the most infamous talked-about attraction was Hell Gate. This was a boat ride through a dark, winding tunnel where patrons in circular boats would be swirled through a simulated whirlpool into a demonic underworld. The experience was filled with startling sensory effects, blasts of hot air, the smell of sulfur, and the terrifying sights of animatronic demons and tortured souls writhing in the flickering red light. It was shockingly macabre for its time, blending religious imagery with thrilling horror, and it scandalized and delighted the public in equal measure. For 7 spectacular seasons, Dreamland stood as this impossible paradise, drawing massive crowds who came to have their senses overwhelmed and their disbelief suspended. But the very elements that made it a fantasy also made it a tinderbox. All those magnificent white buildings were constructed almost entirely of wood and lath, covered in that highly flammable staff plaster to create their ornate details. And the entire electrical system that powered the Million Light Wonder was by modern standards rudimentary and dangerously overburdened. The end began on a windy night in May 1911. In the early morning hours, just as the park had closed, a workman was repairing a leak in the Hell Gate attraction. His light bulb, left too close to the highly flammable tar paper and wood framing, ignited a small fire. Fanned by the strong offshore winds, the flames instantly shot up the flimsy walls and raced across the painted facades with terrifying speed. The conflagration was so sudden and so intense that it created its own firestorm, a whirlwind of superheated air that seemed to consume the entire park at once. The park's own firefighting system was utterly useless against the inferno. Spectacular and horrifying scenes unfolded. The War of the Worlds attraction, stocked with explosives for its battle scenes, began to detonate like a real artillery barrage. The menagerie animals, panicked and trapped, were released by brave keepers only to be overcome by the smoke and heat. Lions, tigers, and elephants perished in the blaze. The massive central tower of light, the park's symbol, glowed red-hot before collapsing inward in a shower of embers. By dawn, the impossible had happened. Every single structure within Dreamland's gates was reduced to smoldering ash and twisted metal. The total destruction was so complete it was as if the park had been nothing more than a mirage. The damage was estimated at nearly $4 million, a catastrophic financial loss. While Luna Park would eventually rebuild after its own fires, the magic of Dreamland was too fragile, its financial backing too shattered. It was never rebuilt. The charred remains were eventually cleared, and the land was sold off for other, far more mundane purposes. The fire didn't just destroy a park, it incinerated an entire universe of fantasy, a testament to the breathtaking fragility of a world built on light and illusion, and a stark warning of how quickly a dream can turn to ash. High on a granite cliff face in New Hampshire's White Mountains, a silent, stony sentinel kept watch over Profile Lake for an estimated 12,000 years. This was the Old Man of the Mountain, a natural granite profile so perfect and so commanding that it felt less like a random rock formation and more like a deliberate work of art sculpted by the very hand of time. From a specific vantage point, the illusion was absolute. The jutting forehead, the distinct Roman nose, the set of the lips, and the strong chin all came together to form the unmistakable, brooding visage of a wise old man gazing eternally eastward. For the people of New Hampshire, this wasn't just a curious rock, it was the granite state's soul, its most defining symbol. It was emblazoned on their state quarter, stamped on their highway welcome signs, and featured prominently on every license plate, a stoic face greeting you at every border crossing. It was a source of immense quiet pride, a permanent feature in a changing world, a symbol of the state's rugged, enduring character. The writer Nathaniel Hawthorne was so captivated by it that he penned a short story, The Great Stone Face, in which he prophesied that a native son would one day return to the region whose features would match the noble visage in the mountain. This deep cultural attachment was nurtured over generations. Families would make pilgrimages to Franconia Notch, craning their necks at the official viewing platforms, pointing and helping younger children see the face for the first time. It was a rite of passage, a moment of awe that connected them to countless previous generations who had stood in that same spot and marveled at the same ancient stone. What few truly grasped was just how fragile this giant actually was. The old man was not a single, solid piece of granite. It was a geological improbability, a series of 5 separate granite ledges that jutted out from the cliff, precariously balanced on top of one another. Ice and time were its architects. Over millennia, water seeped into the cracks and fissures of the granite cliff. Each winter, that water would freeze. As water expands when it turns to ice, it acted like a wedge, slowly, inexorably prying the rock apart in a process known as frost wedging. This glacial paste sculpting eventually carved out the distinctive features, but it also created the formation's inherent weakness. The entire structure was a teetering, natural marvel held in place by gravity and luck. For decades, the state knew its iconic symbol was living on borrowed time. As early as the 1920s, preservationists began efforts to save the old man. A sophisticated system of turnbuckles, cables, and epoxy resins was installed, first in the 1950s and then expanded and improved over the years. Teams of skilled climbers and engineers would make regular, dangerous ascents to tighten the cables and patch cracks, performing life-saving surgery on a mountain. They were fighting a relentless, ultimately unwinnable battle against the very forces that had created their patient. The end came not with a dramatic earthquake or a cataclysm, but quietly in the dead of night. Sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., on May 3, 2003, after a particularly wet and freezing winter, the bonds of gravity and steel finally gave way. The ledges that formed the iconic profile sheared away from the cliff and crashed down 700 feet into the talus slope below. The morning revealed a horrifying sight for the park rangers. The face was simply gone. Where the proud profile had gazed for millennia, there was now only a scarred, blank cliff face. The news was met with a wave of genuine, profound grief that swept far beyond New Hampshire's borders. It was a national moment of mourning for a natural monument. Newspapers ran obituaries, people left flowers and notes at the base of the mountain. The state legislature held a special session to discuss what could be done. There were fleeting, fanciful talks of a reconstruction, but the reality was absolute. The old man was gone. His legacy, however, is permanently cemented. An official state emblem still features his profile. At the viewing plaza in Franconia Notch, a clever memorial was built. A series of steel profilers set at just the right height and angle so that when you look through them, they align to superimpose the reconstructed image of the old man back onto the mountain. A poignant and beautiful technological illusion that allows a new generation to witness the ghost of the stone face that once was. In the heart of Hollywood, where reality and illusion have always blended seamlessly, there once stood a monument that celebrated this very fusion, a restaurant built in the shape of a giant brown derby hat. This was the original Brown Derby on Wilshire Boulevard, and when it opened in 1926, it wasn't just a place to eat. It was a bold statement, an architectural pun made real, and it instantly became the epicenter of Tinseltown's social universe. The story of its creation is pure Hollywood legend. The popular tale, likely apocryphal but too good not to tell, claims it was all the result of a dare. The owner, Robert H. Cobb, who was partners with the famed showman Wilson Misner, was supposedly challenged to build a restaurant that would attract attention. He reportedly replied, "I'll build a restaurant in the shape of a hat if you want me to." And so he did, designed by architect Cecil B. DeMille's art director, Gibbons Gable. The structure was a masterpiece of novelty architecture, also known as programmatic design. It was a perfect, colossal brown derby, complete with a curved brim and a dent in the crown, standing 30 feet tall and 50 feet wide. At night, it was outlined in neon, a glowing beacon for the movie industry's elite. But the magic of the Brown Derby was never just about its exterior. Stepping inside was like entering the green room of the world's most exclusive club. The interior was surprisingly intimate and clubby, with red leather booths, dark wood, and walls absolutely covered in hundreds of caricatures of its famous clientele. This was where the deals were made, the gossip was traded, and the stars came to see and be seen. It was famously said that more cinematic business was conducted over lunch at the Derby than in any studio office. The waiters were masters of discretion, gliding between tables where you might find Clark Gable and Carole Lombard in one booth, and Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall in another. It was the neutral ground where rival studio heads could break bread, and where a young starlet might be discovered by a powerful producer. And from this whirlwind of celebrity and power emerged one of America's most enduring culinary creations. The story goes that one night in the late 1930s, owner Bob Cobb was ravenous. After hours, he went into the kitchen and rummaged through the refrigerators, chopping up whatever he could find. Leftover bacon, a roasted chicken, avocado, tomato, hard-boiled eggs, blue cheese, and lettuce. He tossed it all together with some French dressing and called it a night. The next evening, his friend, the theater owner Sid Grauman of Chinese theater fame, came in and asked for whatever Cobb had last night. He loved it and promptly put it on his own menu. Cobb eventually added it to his, and the Cobb salad was born, a happy accident that became a staple on menus across the globe. For over 3 decades, the Brown Derby wasn't just a restaurant. It was an institution, as much a part of Hollywood's identity as the silver screen itself. It weathered the transition from silent films to talkies, the golden age of the studio system, and the rise of television. It even spawned several sister locations, though none captured the magic of the original hat. But by the 1960s, the world that had sustained it began to change dramatically. The old studio system crumbled, and the culture of exclusive, long, martini-fueled power lunches started to fade. A new generation of stars valued privacy over publicity, preferring secluded spots in Malibu or private clubs to the very public fishbowl of the Derby. Furthermore, the entire landscape of Los Angeles was shifting. The relentless push of urban sprawl and the dominance of the automobile made a destination restaurant on a busy boulevard seem less appealing. The area around Wilshire Boulevard began to change, losing some of its exclusive luster. The restaurant struggled to adapt, but its very identity was tied to a bygone era. It became more of a tourist curiosity than a vital hub for the industry it once served. The final blow came from simple economics. The value of the land beneath the iconic hat had skyrocketed, far outpacing the revenue the aging restaurant could generate. In 1980, despite its historic status and a loud outcry from preservationists and Hollywood old-timers, the impossible happened. The wrecking ball swung, and the giant Derby hat was reduced to rubble. The caricatures that had witnessed half a century of Hollywood history were auctioned off, scattered to the wind. In its place rose a bland, impersonal high-rise office building and a shopping plaza, a trade of unique character for generic utility. The demolition of the Brown Derby felt different than the loss of other landmarks. It wasn't just the loss of a building, but the literal erasure of a symbol. It marked the definitive end of a certain kind of Hollywood glamour, a time when the industry gathered under one whimsical roof, proving that even the most iconic and beloved pieces of our cultural landscape can vanish, leaving behind little more than a famous salad and a lingering sense of nostalgia for a golden age that will never come again. While the Old Man of the Mountain was a solitary natural wonder lost to time, and the Brown Derby a singular icon of glamour, our next landmark is of an entirely different and far more devastating scale. This is the story of the Boston West End, not a building or a park, but an entire world, a vibrant, thriving, and densely woven urban neighborhood that was systematically erased from the map in the name of progress. To understand the magnitude of this loss, you must first picture the West End as it was in the 1950s. Nestled in the shadow of Beacon Hill and bordering the Charles River, it was a classic American immigrant enclave, a dense labyrinth of narrow, winding streets and modest brick row houses. But to call it merely a physical space would be to miss the point entirely. The West End was a living, breathing organism of community. It was a place where generations of immigrants, first from Ireland and Eastern Europe, and later a significant Jewish and Italian population, built their lives. The streets were a constant, lively hum of activity. Children played stickball in the cobblestone streets, neighbors chatted from open windows, and the air was filled with the smells of baking bread from the many small bakeries and the rich aroma of simmering sauces from family-run restaurants. It was a place of incredible social capital where people knew each other by name, looked after one another's children, and supported local businesses that had been run by the same families for decades. It was, by every measure except the purely economic, a successful and functional urban village. This deep sense of belonging and community, however, was invisible to the city planners and politicians of the post-war era. They looked at the West End and saw only what they wanted to see, a slum. The buildings were old, the density was high, and the apartments often lacked modern amenities like private bathrooms. In the eyes of the Boston Housing Authority and powerful figures like Mayor John Hines, these physical characteristics were all that mattered. They ignored the rich social fabric and the overwhelming satisfaction of the residents, who, when surveyed, consistently reported feeling happy and secure in their neighborhood. The stage was set for a grand experiment in urban renewal, a federally funded program that gave cities massive grants to acquire, clear, and redevelop so-called blighted areas. In 1953, the city officially designated the West End for total clearance. They used a controversial and now infamous tool, eminent domain. This legal power, intended for seizing land for clear public use like roads or schools, was twisted to allow the city to forcibly purchase every single property in the 46-acre neighborhood from its owners, both large and small, in order to transfer it to a private developer. The public justification was a mix of cold economics and paternalistic social engineering. Officials argued the land was too valuable for its low-use purpose of housing working-class families. They promised to replace the slum with a modern, rational, and profitable complex of luxury high-rise apartments, new hospitals, and commercial space that would generate more tax revenue. They sold the plan with artists' renderings of gleaming towers set in open, park-like plazas, a stark contrast to the crowded and outdated West End. The reality for the residents was a nightmare of disruption and heartbreak. They were offered minimal compensation for their homes and businesses, far below what it would cost to find comparable housing elsewhere. The city provided little to no meaningful relocation assistance. The tight-knit community was shattered, its families scattered across the Boston metropolitan area, often into housing projects or apartments they could barely afford. The trauma was profound and lasting. In the late 1950s, the wrecking balls moved in. The demolition was mercilessly thorough. Block after block of the historic neighborhood was flattened into a vast, dusty plain of rubble. The sounds of community life were replaced by the roar of heavy machinery and the crash of falling bricks. Everything was gone: the corner markets, the social clubs, the churches and synagogues, the familiar stoops where generations had gathered. In its place rose the Charles River Park development, a sterile landscape of tall, expensive apartment towers set amid sweeping lawns and wide roads, a monument to corporate modernism that was physically and socially isolated from the rest of the city. The destruction of the West End did not achieve its stated goals of creating a better city. Instead, it became a national symbol of catastrophic planning failure and the human cost of top-down social policy. It was a stark lesson that a neighborhood's value cannot be measured in square footage or tax revenue alone. The act galvanized community activists and academics. Sociologist Herbert Gans, who lived in the West End during its final years, published his seminal work, The Urban Villagers, which meticulously documented the rich social life of the community and eviscerated the slum myth that had been used to justify its destruction. The widespread outrage over the West End's fate directly contributed to a national shift in housing policy, leading to much stronger protections for residents and a focus on renovation and community input over wholesale clearance. Today, the site is a quiet, affluent, but largely anonymous part of the city. For the former residents and their descendants, however, the memory of the Old West End remains a powerful and painful touchstone. They hold annual reunions, a bittersweet gathering of a community that was scattered but never truly broken. The story of the West End stands as a permanent warning, a ghost neighborhood that reminds us of the immense power of the state and the profound responsibility that comes with it, teaching us that a city is not just a collection of buildings, but a fragile and irreplaceable network of human connections. In the midst of a booming Detroit at the peak of the Roaring Twenties, a monument to cinematic fantasy rose with unparalleled grandeur. This was the Fox Theater, opened in 1929, and it was far more than just a place to see a movie. It was the undisputed crown jewel of the Fox Theater chain and a breathtaking declaration of the city's immense wealth and cultural ambition. Designed by the renowned theater architect C. Howard Crane, its exterior was a majestic 15-story tower of brick and terracotta, but it was the interior that truly defied belief. Stepping through its doors was like being transported into a sultan's palace from the pages of 1001 Nights. The lavish Orientalist theme was executed with staggering detail and opulence. The grand lobby soared 5 stories high, a cavernous space shimmering with gold leaf, intricate mosaics, and polished marble. Exotic carpets lined the floors, and the air was perfumed with an air of exclusive luxury. The auditorium itself was a universe of fantasy, seating over 5,000 patrons beneath a celestial ceiling designed to resemble a twilight sky, complete with mechanically operated stars that would twinkle above the audience as the lights dimmed. At the heart of this sensory experience was the mighty Wurlitzer, one of the largest and most magnificent theater organs ever built. This colossal instrument wasn't just for providing musical accompaniment to silent films, it was an event in itself. Rising from the orchestra pit on a massive elevator platform, the organist would dazzle the crowd with its vast range of sounds, from deep, thunderous pipes to playful bells and chimes, creating an entire symphony from a single console. For decades, the Fox was the epicenter of entertainment in Detroit. It hosted the biggest movie premieres, the most popular stage shows, and the most famous big bands of the swing era. On a Saturday night, to see a film at the Fox was to participate in a grand civic ritual, an experience of shared awe and glamour that cut across social lines. But the fortunes of the theater became inextricably linked to those of the city it called home. As Detroit's auto industry faced challenges and the painful process of white flight and suburbanization accelerated in the post-war years, the city's core began to hollow out. The very audiences that had once packed the Fox's thousands of seats were now moving to the suburbs, drawn by new shopping malls and modern, multiplex cinemas that offered convenience but none of the grandeur. The Fox, like the city around it, began a long, slow, and heartbreaking decline. The maintenance on such an ornate palace became prohibitively expensive. The gleaming gold leaf grew dull, the plush velvet seats became worn, and the magnificent Wurlitzer fell into silence. By the early 1960s, the theater was operating at a crushing loss, a ghost of its former self playing to sparse crowds in a decaying neighborhood. Its owners, the National Theaters chain, saw no future for it. Despite passionate and vocal protests from dedicated citizens who recognized its cultural value, the decision was made. The Fox Theater was not just closed, it was to be obliterated. In the spring of 1963, the wrecking ball swung, reducing the Sultan's palace to a mountain of rubble and dust. The loss was visceral and profound, a stark symbol of a city seemingly in a spiral of self-cannibalization. tearing down its own history. But the demolition of this Detroit landmark, much like the loss of Penn Station in New York that same year, created a powerful and enduring backlash. It served as a tragic catalyst, a clarion call that jolted preservationists into action across the nation. The fight to save the Fox, though lost, demonstrated that there was a passionate constituency willing to fight for these historic theaters. It directly inspired and fueled the burgeoning historic theater preservation movement, leading to the formation of organizations like the League of Historic American Theaters, which provided the resources and network to help save other Fox theaters in St. Louis, Atlanta, and Oakland from a similar fate. The destruction of Detroit's Fox was a painful lesson in cultural amnesia, but its memory became the very fuel that would ensure other cities would not make the same catastrophic mistake. While the loss of Detroit's Fox Theater was a slow decline, the end of our next landmark was a sudden shock, a vibrant playground silenced at the peak of its popularity. For generations of families in the New York metropolitan area, summer wasn't officially here until you heard the distant rumble of the Cyclone roller coaster and the joyful screams carried on the breeze from across the Hudson River. This was Palisades Amusement Park, a sprawling, raucous kingdom of fun perched dramatically on the cliffs of New Jersey, and for over 70 years it was an indispensable part of American leisure. Opening its gates in 1898, Palisades began as a more refined destination, featuring a beautiful saltwater swimming pool that was one of the largest in the world, drawing crowds eager to escape the city heat. But it soon evolved into something far more thrilling, a direct and fierce competitor to Coney Island. Its location was its first great attraction. The park offered staggering, panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline, a breathtaking backdrop to a day of carefree excitement. And what excitement it offered! The park was a sensory overload in the best possible way. The air was thick with the irresistible smell of hot dogs, fries, and saltwater taffy. The sound was a constant, joyful cacophony of calliope music, the clackety-clack of roller coaster chains, and the delighted shrieks from rides like the iconic Cyclone, a massive wooden coaster known for its terrifying drops and relentless speed. There was the Tunnel of Love for couples, a sprawling funhouse called the Alps with its moving floors and air jets, and kiddie land for the little ones. It was a place of pure, unpretentious, democratic fun, where a factory worker could stand in line next to a CEO, both just eager for their turn on the wild mouse. The park's cultural impact was cemented in 1962 when singer Freddie Cannon released the rock and roll anthem, Palisades Park. The song's driving beat and lyrics about winning a stuffed bear and doing the chicken for a quarter perfectly captured the park's infectious energy, becoming a top 10 hit and broadcasting its appeal to a national audience. It was more than a jingle, it was a perfect time capsule of the era's youthful spirit. For millions, a summer was incomplete without at least one pilgrimage to this chaotic, wonderful place. Which is why the announcement in 1971 was so utterly devastating. The park's owners, the Irving and Jack Rosenthal, revealed that Palisades would not open for the season. The reason was not declining attendance. The park was still pulling in massive crowds with over 5 million visitors in its final year. The reason was a staggering multi-million-dollar real estate deal. The land the park sat on, with its priceless views of New York City, had become exponentially more valuable than the park itself could ever be. The Rosenthals sold the entire 120-acre property to a developer for a reported $30 million. The plan was to demolish every last bit of the park and replace it with a massive complex of high-rise luxury apartment towers. The public outcry was immediate and passionate. There were protests, petitions, and pleas from loyal fans, but the deal was final. The closure felt like a profound betrayal. This wasn't a landmark succumbing to age or a natural disaster. It was a thriving, beloved institution being euthanized for pure, unadulterated profit. The demolition was swift and merciless. The cyclone, which had thrilled riders for over 4 decades, was unceremoniously torn down. The saltwater pool was filled in. The funhouse was smashed to splinters. Where the sounds of laughter and music once echoed, there was now only the sound of construction equipment building the very towers that had sealed its fate. The sprawling Fantasyland was replaced by the sterile, quiet streets of a residential neighborhood known as Upper Grandview. For those who had loved it, driving by and seeing the apartments was a visceral punch to the gut, a constant reminder of a stolen childhood treasure. The death of Palisades Park became a powerful symbol of a changing America, where the value of shared public memory and experience was increasingly being overshadowed by the cold, hard calculus of real estate development. It proved that no matter how much joy you bring, how many memories you hold, or how famous your theme song is, you are never safe if you are sitting on land that someone else sees as a future profit margin. Soaring over the Philadelphia skyline for the better part of a century, a beacon of light and modernity declared the city's arrival into a new era. This was the iconic rooftop sign of the PSFS building, a masterpiece of Art Deco architecture and the undisputed progenitor of the modern skyscraper. Designed by architects George Howe and William Lescaze and completed in 1932, the building itself was a revolutionary statement. It was the first truly international-style skyscraper in the United States, a stark, sleek slab of functionalist design that rejected historical ornament in favor of pure, unadorned form. Its clean lines, ribbon windows, and cantilevered base were a shock to a city still building in the Beaux Arts tradition, a bold glimpse of the future. But while the architectural intelligentsia marveled at its groundbreaking form, it was the sign on its roof that captured the heart of the public and became the building's true identity. Stretching an astounding 27 feet high and 137 feet long, the sign spelled out the building's financier in massive, illuminated letters, PSFS, for the Philadelphia Saving Fund Society. It was constructed from red neon tubes mounted on a steel frame, and at night it would ignite into a brilliant, fiery script against the dark sky, visible from miles away. For generations of Philadelphians, that sign was more than an advertisement. It was a civic compass point, a reassuring constant in the urban landscape. It was the backdrop to countless family photos, the guiding star for commuters coming home on the train, and the subject of a popular local riddle: what's the biggest word in Philadelphia? The answer, of course, was PSFS. The sign transcended its commercial purpose to become a beloved symbol of the city itself, a piece of shared cultural property that belonged to everyone. The building changed hands and functions over the decades, and by the 1990s, it was purchased by a developer for conversion into a luxury Lowe's hotel. This is where the story takes its controversial turn. The new owners embarked on a massive, historically sensitive renovation. They rightly understood the architectural significance of the structure and went to great lengths to preserve its historic lobbies and interiors, even restoring the original, groundbreaking air conditioning system. Yet, in a decision that stunned and outraged preservationists and the public alike, they made the choice to remove the gigantic rooftop sign. The justification was multifaceted and, to many, completely unconvincing. The developers argued that the sign's messaging was obsolete. The Philadelphia Saving Fund Society had long since been absorbed into a larger bank and no longer existed. They claimed the structure was deteriorated and posed a potential safety risk. Furthermore, from a branding perspective, they saw no reason to maintain a giant advertisement for a defunct company on their new chic hotel. What they failed to grasp was that the sign had stopped being an advertisement decades prior. It had evolved into pure iconography, a work of art in its own right that was intrinsically tied to the building's silhouette and the city's visual memory. The removal felt like a profound act of cultural amnesia, a decision made by outsiders who saw only letters and rusted steel, not the decades of meaning and memory they supported. The public backlash was swift and fierce. Editorials condemned the move, historians decried it, and citizens felt a genuine sense of loss. The controversy highlighted a fascinating and often fraught tension in preservation philosophy. What do we save? Is it enough to preserve the architect's original, pristine design intent, which in this case was a pure, unadorned form? Or do we also preserve the layers of history and meaning that accumulate over a building's life, the elements that the public embraces and makes its own? The PSFS sign was not part of the original architectural drawings. It was added later, yet it became the building's most defining feature. Its removal, while leaving the protected historic shell intact, was seen by many as a hollow victory for preservation. It saved the body but erased the soul. The sign was dismantled and put into storage, its fate uncertain for years, a ghost haunting the now perfectly restored but somehow diminished skyline. This act of removing a beloved, though non-original, feature set a troubling precedent and sparked a city-wide conversation about what truly constitutes a landmark. Is it only the architect's initial vision, or is it the living, breathing entity that a building becomes through its interaction with the city and its people over time? The story of the PSFS sign is a powerful lesson that a landmark is not just a collection of bricks and mortar. It is also made of light, memory, and a sense of place, elements that can be just as fragile and, once removed, just as difficult to ever truly replace. While the grand movie palaces and urban neighborhoods were falling to the wrecking ball, a radically different kind of landmark was rising from the flat Texas plains, one that promised to defy nature itself. When the Harris County Domed Stadium opened in Houston in 1965, it was immediately christened the Astrodome and hailed as the eighth wonder of the world. It was a breathtaking feat of engineering, the world's first fully enclosed, air-conditioned sports stadium, a colossal spaceship of concrete and steel designed to shield spectators and athletes from the oppressive Gulf Coast heat and humidity. Its most celebrated feature was the roof, a vast latticework of lucite panels that bathed the interior in a soft, natural light, allowing real grass to grow on the playing field below. This was the crucial, visionary element, a pristine, climate-controlled environment where the national pastime could be played in perfect 72-degree comfort, day or night, rain or shine. The gleaming white roof, the cushioned theater seats, the futuristic electronic scoreboard that exploded with animated cowboy graphics, every detail was designed to signal a triumphant leap into a new space-age era. It wasn't just a stadium, it was a monument to American optimism and technological prowess. But the architects of this miracle had overlooked a fundamental law of nature. Baseball is played outside, and for a reason. The very lucite panels that allowed the sun's life-giving rays to reach the Bermuda grass below also created a catastrophic optical illusion for the players. The panels were constructed in a multi-faceted pattern of ribs and squares, and from the perspective of a center fielder tracking a high fly ball, the white panels created a dizzying, fragmented mosaic against the sky. The ball would vanish into this blinding checkerboard pattern, reappearing only at the last second, turning routine outs into dangerous adventures in misjudgment. The solution, while practical, was utterly counterproductive. The panels were painted over to reduce the glare, a fix that solved the problem for the fielders but spelled doom for the grass. Without sunlight, the carefully cultivated Bermuda grass withered and died, leaving the Astros with a magnificent billion-dollar domed stadium and a field of dirt and dead turf just in time for the 1966 season. The entire premise of the dome was suddenly, embarrassingly, in jeopardy. Faced with this existential crisis, the stadium's operators turned to the chemical giant Monsanto, which had been developing an artificial grass product called chemgrass. In a desperate move, the dead natural turf was ripped out and replaced with this new, bright green plastic carpet. When the 1966 season opened, the Houston Astros took the field on a surface no one had ever seen before. It was a sensation, the media, seizing on the stadium's name, dubbed the new miracle surface AstroTurf, and a brand name instantly became a generic term for an entire industry. This wasn't just a new type of flooring, it was a paradigm shift. AstroTurf was revolutionary. It never needed mowing or watering, it always looked perfectly emerald green, and it drained instantly, making rain delays a thing of past. It was the perfect surface for the multi-purpose concrete donut stadiums that would be built over the next 2 decades, designed to host both baseball and football with maximum efficiency. The Astrodome had not only been saved, it had accidentally birthed a new technological standard for sports. For the next 3 decades, the Astrodome's iconic rug was the stage for some of the most memorable moments in American sports and entertainment. It was the home of the Love Ya Blue Houston Oilers, where running back Earl Campbell pounded the unforgiving surface on his way to the end zone. It was where Nolan Ryan threw 2 of his 7 no-hitters, his fastball seeming to sizzle even faster as it caromed off the hard turf. It was where the University of Houston's high-flying football team, the Phi Slama Jama squad, electrified crowds. Beyond sports, the Dome hosted mammoth concerts, rodeos, and even the Battle of the Sexes tennis match between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs in 1973, an event watched by millions that was played out on its distinctive green carpet. The AstroTurf was more than a surface. It was a symbol of an era that valued innovation, durability, and sleek, modern efficiency over tradition and natural nuance. Yet, the very qualities that made AstroTurf a miracle also revealed its flaws. Players began to complain loudly about its unforgiving nature. The hard surface was brutal on joints and led to a rash of turf toe injuries and other ailments. The ball behaved differently, bouncing higher and moving faster, changing the fundamental nature of the games played on it. As the 90s gave way to the new millennium, a backlash grew. A new generation of ballparks, like Baltimore's Camden Yards, embraced a return to natural grass and intimate, old-fashioned design, making the Astrodome and its concrete cousins seem cold and obsolete. The Houston Astros and the NFL's Texans moved into new, state-of-the-art stadiums with real, natural grass fields, leaving the 8th wonder of the world empty and without a primary tenant. For over a decade, the Astrodome entered a long, sad period of limbo. It sat silent, its seats collecting dust, its famous AstroTurf eventually ripped up, a ghost of its former self. Debate raged over its fate, with proposals ranging from demolition to ambitious, expensive renovation. In 2013, it was officially closed for good. The final, symbolic end of its era came in 2016, when the Astrodome was declared non-compliant with fire code and had its certificate of occupancy revoked, a bureaucratic death sentence for a building that once represented the future. Today, it still stands, a hulking relic on the Houston skyline, a monument to a future that never quite arrived. Its legacy is the grass that died, the plastic carpet that replaced it, and the enduring lesson that even the most wondrous innovations can become outdated, leaving behind empty domes and the faded, artificial echoes of glory. As the jet age dawned in the 1950s, air travel was transforming from a perilous adventure for the wealthy into a symbol of modern, democratic luxury. It demanded a new kind of architecture, one that could capture the soaring spirit of this new era. The man who would answer that call was the visionary architect Eero Saarinen. Commissioned by Trans World Airlines to design a terminal that would be their gateway to the world at New York's Idlewild Airport, Saarinen didn't just design a building, he sculpted an experience. He immersed himself in the very idea of flight, declaring he wanted to create a building that was distinctive and memorable, one that would embody the excitement of travel itself. The result, which opened in 1962, was the TWA Flight Center, a structure that remains one of the most breathtaking and iconic pieces of architecture ever built. Approaching the terminal was like watching a giant, graceful bird settle onto the tarmac. Saarainen's design was a masterwork of expressionist architecture, a fluid, sweeping form of reinforced concrete that seemed to defy gravity. The roof, a series of soaring, thin shell concrete vaults, flowed together in a continuous, dynamic curve, creating a sense of majestic, upward movement. The walls were vast, curved panes of glass, blurring the line between inside and out, flooding the space with natural light and offering passengers thrilling views of the sleek TWA jets they were about to board. Every single detail, down to the door handles, the check-in counters, and the iconic red carpet, was custom designed by Saarainen and his team to create a completely cohesive and immersive environment. This wasn't a mere terminal, it was a portal to another world, a cathedral dedicated to the romance of flight. Stepping inside was an experience of pure theater. The Grand Hall, known as the Head House, was a vast, awe-inspiring volume of space. Passengers would enter on a balcony level, looking down into the sunken lounge where clusters of red tulip chairs, also designed by Saarainen, offered islands of repose. The entire space was alive with movement and sound. The constant, muffled echo of flight announcements would mingle with the excited chatter of travelers. You could watch people flowing through the 4 iconic, tube-like passenger bridges that extended like tentacles from the main hall, leading them directly to their awaiting aircraft. The feeling was one of boundless optimism and sleek, futuristic glamour. This was the golden age of air travel, when people dressed in their finest to fly, and the TWA terminal was the ultimate stage for this sophisticated ritual. It made you feel like a protagonist in a stylish mid-century modern film, a jet-setter embarking on a grand adventure, but the very features that made it an architectural masterpiece became its greatest liabilities. The TWA Flight Center was designed for an era of propliners and early, smaller jet aircraft like the Boeing 707. It was built to handle a fraction of the passenger volume that would become standard just a few decades later. The advent of the jumbo jet, specifically the Boeing 747, and the subsequent explosion of mass commercial aviation changed everything. The terminal's beautifully sculpted, flowing interiors simply couldn't accommodate the security checkpoints, the rows of jet bridges, and the vast waiting areas required for hundreds of passengers disembarking from a single plane. The open, undivided space, so brilliant for its sense of grandeur, was hopelessly inefficient for processing large crowds. Passengers were forced into cramped, makeshift waiting areas, and the check-in process became a logistical nightmare funneled through the originally elegant, but now hopelessly outdated counters. The building became a beautiful anachronism, an exquisite sculpture trying to function as a modern, high-volume machine. Following TWA's financial struggles and eventual absorption into American Airlines, the fate of its iconic terminal grew increasingly uncertain. It was finally shuttered in 2001, a relic from a different time, sitting silent and empty on the periphery of the massively expanded JFK Airport. For years, it sat dormant, a ghost of jet-age glamour, its future the subject of intense debate among preservationists who feared it would be demolished. Its salvation came from a brilliantly conceived plan of adaptive reuse. Instead of trying to force it to function as a modern terminal, it was reborn. After a meticulous, multi-year restoration, the TWA Flight Center reopened in 2019 as the TWA Hotel. The transformation is a stunning success story in historic preservation. The soaring head house has been restored to its original splendor, now serving as the hotel's breathtaking lobby. The original departure and arrival boards still click away, not with real flight information, but with nostalgic messages. The sunken lounge is once again a vibrant social space. The 2 historic wings now house the hotel's guest rooms and, perhaps most wonderfully, a vintage Lockheed Constellation aircraft, a Coney, has been parked on the tarmac and converted into a cocktail bar. The building is no longer a struggling transit hub. It is a destination in itself, a living museum that allows a new generation to step back in time and experience a sliver of the magic and optimism that once defined the dawn of the jet age. Yet while the TWA terminal was reborn as a monument to retro glamour, other historic structures have faced a far more uncertain fate, not due to changing tastes, but because the very ground they stand on has turned against them. In the steep valleys of western Pennsylvania, a different kind of engineering marvel was built not for luxury but for sheer, desperate survival. This is the story of the Johnstown Inclined Plane, a massive funicular railway that began as a literal lifeline and became an enduring symbol of a community's resilience. To understand why this strange and magnificent machine was built, you must first understand the trauma that necessitated it. On May 31, 1889, after a period of exceptionally heavy rain, the South Fork Dam, located 14 miles upstream from the bustling steel town of Johnstown, catastrophically failed. A wall of water, estimated to be 40 feet high and carrying unimaginable torrents of debris, tore through the Coney Valley at terrifying speed. It scoured the landscape clean, obliterating everything in its path before crashing into Johnstown itself. The Great Johnstown Flood remains one of the deadliest disasters in American history, claiming over 2,200 lives and utterly destroying the town. In the grim aftermath, as the community began the heartbreaking work of rebuilding, a critical question emerged. How could they prevent such unimaginable loss of life from ever happening again? The answer was as audacious as it was simple. They would build an escape route straight up the side of the valley. The Johnstown Inclined Plane was conceived as a massive emergency elevator, a way to swiftly evacuate residents from the flood-prone valley floor to the safety of the high ground on the hill of Westmont. Construction began in 1890 and was completed just a year later. The engineering was staggering in its scale and simplicity. Two large parallel track beds were carved and built into the steep hillside, rising at a breathtaking 58.8% grade. Two passenger and vehicle cars were connected by a massive steel cable that ran around a 32-foot diameter sheave or pulley at the top of the incline. The cars were counterbalanced. As one went down, the other went up, powered by a pair of massive steam engines that were later converted to electric motors. It was, and remains, the world's steepest vehicular inclined plane, an unparalleled feat of civil engineering born from tragedy. For over 130 years, the inclined plane was far more than just a tourist attraction or a convenient commute. It was the town's elevator, its most vital piece of public infrastructure, and its beating heart. It ferried generations of workers down to the steel mills in the morning and back up to their homes in the evening. It carried school children, delivery trucks, and even ambulances, serving as the quickest route to the main hospital located at the top. On weekends and holidays, it was a beloved excursion, carrying families to the overlook at the summit, which offered a stunning, panoramic view of the city and the valleys below. It was a constant, reliable presence in the lives of Johnstown residents, a rolling testament to their ability to overcome catastrophe. It had itself served as a refuge during subsequent floods in 1936 and 1977, fulfilling its original solemn purpose. However, time, weather, and economic decline began to take their toll on the historic structure. The machinery, though maintained with care and pride, was antiquated. The wooden support trestles, which carried the tracks up the mountainside, were constantly exposed to the harsh Pennsylvania elements. In recent years, inspections began to reveal serious structural issues. The most critical problem was the deterioration of the concrete piers and the steel supports embedded within them that anchored the entire system to the hillside. Engineers declared that without a comprehensive multi-million-dollar restoration, the incline was no longer safe to operate. In April 2023, after one such inspection revealed significant new concerns, the Johnstown Inclined Plane was abruptly and indefinitely closed to the public. The sudden silence of the cars was a profound shock to the community. The sight of the motionless tracks on the hillside served as a constant, painful reminder of what had been lost. The challenge facing the incline is not a lack of love, but a desperate shortage of money. The estimated cost for a full rehabilitation is staggering, running into the tens of millions of dollars, a sum that the small, financially struggling city of Johnstown simply cannot afford on its own. A grassroots preservation movement has sprung up, launching fundraising campaigns and applying for state and federal grants, but the process is slow and fiercely competitive. The future of the Johnstown inclined plane now hangs in a precarious balance. It is a race against time and decay, a test of whether a community's cherished history can be saved in the face of immense financial practicalities. Its potential loss would be a double tragedy. Not only would it erase a unique piece of industrial and transportation history, but it would sever a living link to the very event that defined Johnstown's identity, silencing a machine that for over a century stood as a promise that they would never be caught helpless again. While the Johnstown Incline represents an industrial lifeline suspended in uncertainty, another landmark story offers a more hopeful arc, a tale of a modern ruin saved from the brink by sheer, passionate public will. On the edge of Biscayne Bay in Miami, a breathtaking piece of architectural audacity sits not as a ghost, but as a phoenix waiting to rise. This is the Miami Marine Stadium, a structure so daring and futuristic that it still looks like it was beamed in from another era, a concrete spaceship that crash-landed on the Florida coast. Designed by the Cuban-born architect Hilario Candela for the firm of Pancoast, Ferrandino, Grafton, and Skeels, the stadium was an engineering marvel from the moment its gates opened in 1963. Its most stunning feature is the cantilevered roof, a vast folded plate concrete canopy that stretches an astonishing 326 feet across the seating area without a single interior column to obstruct the view. At just 26 years old, Candela had designed one of the longest spans of cantilevered concrete in the entire world. This wasn't just a roof, it was a soaring, sculptural wave of concrete, seemingly frozen in mid-crash, defying gravity and logic to shelter over 6,500 spectators from the tropical sun. And what a spectacle those spectators witnessed! The stadium was purpose-built for powerboat racing, a sport that captured the glamorous, high-octane spirit of Miami itself. The thunderous roar of the engines would echo across the water as the brightly colored boats skimmed and leapt across the bay, framed by the stunning backdrop of the downtown skyline. But the stadium's legacy was cemented when it quickly evolved into one of the most legendary and diverse concert venues in American history. Its stage, built right on the water, became a cultural pulpit. On a single, perfectly humid night, you might have seen Elvis Presley performing for a film, the Beatles playing one of their final tours, or a young Jimmy Buffett finding his Key West sound. It was the epicenter of a cultural explosion, hosting everything from grand opera and symphony orchestras to rowdy rock concerts, and most importantly, becoming the heart of Miami's Cuban exile community, hosting iconic salsa and Latin jazz acts like Celia Cruz and Willie Quirino. The experience was magical. Fans could watch the show from the concrete grandstands or anchor their boats in the basin just offshore, turning the entire bay into a floating, rocking auditorium under the stars. This golden age came to a sudden, brutal halt in 1992, when Hurricane Andrew, one of the most powerful storms ever to strike the United States, plowed into South Florida. It left unimaginable destruction in its wake. The Marine Stadium, sitting directly in the storm's path, was severely damaged. The roof was scarred, the seats were torn up, and the entire facility was inundated with a toxic slurry of saltwater and debris. The city, overwhelmed by a regional catastrophe, made a short-sighted and fateful decision. Instead of assessing the damage and repairing the structurally sound building, they simply chained the gates shut, slapped on a condemnation notice, and walked away. For decades, the stadium was left to the elements and the vandals. It became a surreal, post-apocalyptic ruin. graffiti artists covered every available surface with vibrant, sprawling murals, transforming it into an accidental open-air gallery. Homeless individuals sought shelter in its shadowy corners, and nature began its slow reclamation with mangroves sprouting through cracks in the pavement. It was a heartbreaking sight, a monument to modernism and communal joy left to rot in plain sight, its future seemingly sealed for demolition. But the very people who had cherished it refused to let it die. A grassroots preservation movement, led by a determined group of architects, historians, and local citizens, began to fight back. They formed the Friends of Miami Marine Stadium and waged a relentless, years-long campaign to save it. They argued that the building was not just sound, but was a landmark of unparalleled architectural significance. They hosted clandestine tours, organized clean-up days, and championed its cause at every level of city government, slowly turning the tide of public opinion. Their fight was a masterclass in citizen activism, proving that a building's value isn't determined by its current state, but by the memories it holds and the potential it embodies. Their perseverance paid off. In 2016, the National Trust for Historic Preservation designated the stadium a national treasure, lending crucial national credibility to the local effort. This was the turning point. Funding was secured, detailed plans were drawn up, and the dream of restoration began to feel like an imminent reality. The story of the Miami Marine Stadium is a powerful testament to the idea that abandonment is not an ending but a pause. It stands today not as a ruin but as a symbol of hope, a concrete promise that even the most neglected pieces of our past can be revived, waiting patiently for the cheers and the roar of the engines to return once more. Imagine a Las Vegas Strip without the pyramid of the Luxor, the fountains of the Bellagio, or the soaring skyline of today. Roll back the clock to before 1956, and you would find a very different world, a dusty two-lane highway known as Los Angeles Highway, cutting through the empty desert, dotted not with corporate giants, but with intimate, personality-driven oases that felt more like stylish roadside motels than the casinos we know now. This was the birthplace of modern Vegas, a pioneering stretch where visionaries gambled on the idea that luxury, entertainment, and legal gambling could draw travelers from across America. The undisputed patriarch of this new era was the El Rancho Vegas. Opened in April of 1941 by Thomas Hull, a California hotelier, it was the very first resort on the highway that would become the Strip. Hull's genius was location. He built just outside the Las Vegas city limits to avoid its taxes and regulations, setting a precedent every resort would follow. El Rancho wasn't a fortress of gaming. It was a sprawling, 63-acre Western-themed playground. Its main building was a long, low-slung ranch-style structure with a massive windmill that became its signature icon. It featured a huge swimming pool, a showroom that hosted early stars like Frank Sinatra and Abbott and Costello, and a casino that was almost an afterthought, tucked away from the main entertainment. The atmosphere was relaxed, casual, and distinctly Californian, offering a desert dude ranch experience with the added thrill of a gaming tables. For nearly 2 decades, it was the social heart of the nascent Strip, a place where everyone from Hollywood celebrities to everyday tourists mingled under the desert stars. Its reign ended with shocking suddenness in the early morning hours of March 17, 1960. A fire broke out in the lobby and, fanned by fierce desert winds, quickly became an inferno. Within hours, the entire complex was reduced to smoldering ashes and twisted steel. The cause was never officially determined, but its destruction felt symbolic, a fiery end to the very first chapter of the Strip's story, clearing the literal and metaphorical ground for a new, brasher era to begin. As the 40s gave way to the 50s, the aesthetic of the Strip began to evolve from rustic Western charm into something sleeker, more modern, and utterly captivating. The next wave of properties embraced the space-age optimism and Hollywood glamour of post-war America, and no place embodied this better than the original Sahara Hotel. Opening in 1952, the Sahara was a breathtaking leap forward. Its name promised exoticism, but its style was pure mid-century modern cool. The main building was a masterpiece of sleek lines with a dramatically cantilevered porte-cochere that seemed to float over the entrance drive. Its most iconic feature was the soaring 150-foot minaret-shaped sign, a marvel of neon and steel that became an instant landmark, a beacon of sophistication in the desert night. Inside, the theme was Casablanca meets Palm Springs. The lobby featured lush, tropical vegetation, bubbling fountains, and sleek, modern furniture. The casino, called the House of French Luck, was adorned with ornate Moroccan-style lanterns and decor. The Sahara was also an entertainment powerhouse. Its Congo showroom became one of the most prestigious rooms in town, headlining legends like Judy Garland, Louis Armstrong, and the Rat Pack. It was also home to the first permanent performance of the famous hypnotist act, Raven's Magical Hypnotism, which ran for an astonishing 17 years. The Sahara wasn't just a casino, it was a self-contained world of luxury and fantasy, a place where guests could feel effortlessly chic and cosmopolitan, a million miles away from the dusty streets of downtown Las Vegas. It set a new standard for what a resort could be, proving that theme and atmosphere were just as important as the games on the casino floor. This era of personalized designer resorts reached its zenith with properties like the Dunes, the Sands, and the unforgettable Boardwalk Hotel and Casino. The Boardwalk, which opened in the mid-1960s, was perhaps the most whimsical of them all. As its name suggests, it was designed to evoke the festive atmosphere of Atlantic City. Its facade was a riot of color and fun, featuring a giant, functioning Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, and a carnival midway. The idea was to create a family-friendly amusement park vibe right on the Strip, a concept that was decades ahead of its time. Inside, the decor continued the theme with candy-striped patterns, carnival games, and a light-hearted, playful feel that stood in stark contrast to the more serious, adult-oriented glamour of the Sahara or the Sands. These places had soul. They were built by individual entrepreneurs with distinct personalities, men like Belden Cattleman of the El Rancho, Milton Prell of the Sahara, and Jay Sarno, who would soon change everything. You knew which hotel you were in by its smell, its soundtrack, and its unique character. The casino bosses knew their high rollers by name, and the entertainment was intimate, often with the stars mingling with the audience after their shows. This was the pioneering spirit of Old Vegas, risky, creative, and deeply human in scale. The end of this golden age wasn't caused by a natural disaster, but by a financial one. The catalyst for change was the arrival of Howard Hughes in 1966, who began buying up hotels like a child collecting toys. But the true death knell for Old Vegas was the corporate takeover that followed. The turning point is often pinpointed to the arrival of Jay Sarno's Caesar's Palace in 1966. While still the vision of a single creator, its unprecedented scale and cost $25 million, a fortune at the time, signaled a new arms race. Then, in the early 1970s, the corporate chains took notice. Hilton, Holiday Inn, and other publicly traded corporations with massive lines of credit and shareholder expectations began to see Las Vegas not as a playground for gamblers, but as a real estate portfolio. They looked at the charming but financially inefficient old properties sitting on increasingly valuable land and saw an opportunity. One by one, the icons of the 50s and 60s were systematically acquired, closed, and demolished. The Sands, the home of the Rat Pack, was imploded in 1996. The Dunes was blown up in '93. The landmark, with its iconic Space Needle Tower, was toppled in '95. Even the mighty Sahara, after decades of decline, finally closed its doors in 2011 and was later demolished to make way for a new, unnamed development that has yet to fully materialize. The boardwalk met its end in 2006. its carnival theme and Ferris wheel no match for the economic might of the mega resorts that now surrounded it. The transformation was total. The intimate, personality-driven resorts were replaced by colossal, 3,000-room corporate complexes. The individual vision of an owner was replaced by the calculated, market-tested decisions of a boardroom. The goal was no longer to create a unique experience, but to maximize profit per square foot, to create an efficient machine for separating guests from their money through vast, maze-like casinos, high-end retail malls, and celebrity chef restaurants. The charming, low-slung skyline of neon signs and ranch roofs was obliterated, replaced by a soaring canyon of glass and steel that blocked out the sun and the desert sky. The pioneering spirit of Old Vegas, that Wild West gamble on a dream, was paved over, quite literally, by parking lots for the new corporate palaces. What was lost was more than just buildings. It was a sense of place, of intimacy, and of a specific, rakish glamour that was born in the desert and could never be truly replicated. The old strip exists now only in faded photographs, in films like Ocean's 11, and in the memories of those who remember a time when Vegas felt less like a corporate destination and more like a secret, thrilling discovery at the end of a long, dark road. While the old Las Vegas Strip was being erased by corporate implosions, a very different kind of demolition was taking place in the American heartland, one that would become a potent symbol not of changing tastes but of a broken promise. In St. Louis, Missouri, a monumental experiment in urban living rose from the ground with the best of intentions, only to become one of the most infamous failures in American architectural history. This was the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex, and its story is a tragic lesson in how a perfect vision on paper can unravel into a nightmare on Earth. The project was born from the idealism of the post-war era and the urgent need to replace the city's sprawling slums. Designed by the renowned architect Minoru Yamasaki, who would later design the World Trade Center, Pruitt-Igoe was initially hailed as a modernist marvel. The plans were pure utopia, embodying the principles of Le Corbusier's radiant city, a vision of high-rise towers set within vast, open park-like spaces. The 33 identical 11-story buildings were sleek, minimalist slabs arranged in meticulous rows. The design was intended to promote light, air, and a sense of spacious community, a radical upgrade from the dark, overcrowded tenements they replaced. The apartments themselves were a significant improvement, featuring modern appliances, large windows, and private bathrooms. For the low-income families, predominantly African American, who moved in starting in 1954, it represented hope, a chance to leave behind decrepit housing for a bright, new, and healthy environment. It was architecture with a social conscience, a physical manifestation of the belief that better buildings could create a better society. Yet, almost from the very beginning, the design's fatal flaws became apparent. The utopian vision had been gutted by brutal cost-cutting measures even before the first concrete was poured. To secure federal funding, the St. Louis Housing Authority slashed the project's budget dramatically. These were not mere trims, they were amputations that removed the very features that would have made the complex livable. The most devastating cut was the elimination of skip-stop elevators. Yamasaki's original plan called for elevators that would only stop on every third floor, creating semi-private, vertical neighborhoods, with shared laundry and lounge spaces on the stop floors to encourage community interaction. Instead, the elevators stopped at every floor, but this created long, anonymous, and terrifyingly barren double-loaded corridors that residents called gauntlets, where crime could flourish unseen. The lush landscaping for the vast communal grounds was also eliminated, leaving behind empty, hard-packed dirt lots that offered no play areas for children and no places for adults to gather safely. The amenities that were built, like the communal laundry rooms in the basements, became dark, dangerous spaces to be avoided. These design failures were then catastrophically amplified by disastrous public policy. The city's rigid segregationist policies concentrated an overwhelmingly poor, predominantly female-headed population with high unemployment into the complex. A controversial welfare ceiling law capped public assistance payments, which unintentionally punished two-parent families. If a father remained in the household, the family's benefits were cut, creating a perverse incentive for him to leave. This policy effectively engineered a population with an extreme concentration of poverty and social instability. Furthermore, the city provided almost no funding for ongoing maintenance. As the thousands of residents, including many children, placed immense strain on the cheaply constructed buildings, things began to break: elevators, incinerators, windows, and they were never repaired. The broken windows theory became a grim reality. One broken window led to another, and the sense of decay and neglect became self-perpetuating. The descent was shockingly rapid. By the late 1950s, vacancy rates were soaring as those who could afford to leave did so, further concentrating the most vulnerable populations. Gangs took control of the towers, and the long, windowless corridors and stairwells became their territory. Police would only enter the complex in armed pairs. The once pristine apartments were vandalized, and the vacant units were stripped of anything valuable, their copper pipes and wiring ripped from the walls. The open spaces between the towers, meant for recreation, became a no-man's land of danger and despair. Pruitt Igoe had transformed from a symbol of hope into a national byword for urban failure, a dystopian nightmare broadcast on the evening news. The end was as dramatic as the fall. After years of trying and failing to manage the unmanageable, the St. Louis Housing Authority made the unprecedented decision to admit total defeat. On March 16, 1972, at 3 p.m., the world watched on live television as the first of the Pruitt Igoe towers was dynamited. A series of controlled explosions ripped through the foundation, and the concrete slab swayed and then collapsed into a massive plume of dust and debris. The crowd that had gathered cheered. Over the next few years, the remaining towers were systematically demolished, each implosion feeling like a funeral for a failed dream. The architectural historian Charles Jenks famously declared that modern architecture died in St. Louis at 3:32 p.m. On that day, while his statement was intentionally provocative, it captured a profound truth. The destruction of Pruitt Igoe didn't just mark the failure of one housing project. It shattered the core modernist belief that architecture alone could engineer social progress. It became the ultimate cautionary tale, a stark reminder that buildings do not exist in a vacuum. They are deeply intertwined with the economic policies, social structures, and human choices that fill them with life, for better or for worse. The empty field where the towers once stood remains a silent, powerful monument to the complexity of the problems we try to solve with concrete and steel, and the tragic consequences of forgetting the people who are meant to live inside. Rising from Buffalo's east side like a majestic, rusting sentinel, the city's central terminal stands as a monumental ghost from a time when the railroad was the undisputed king of American travel. This was no mere station. It was a 17-acre Art Deco colossus, a cathedral of transportation built to handle 20 million passengers a year and serve as the proud eastern gateway for the New York Central Railroad's famed 20th Century Limited and other legendary lines pushing westward. When its doors opened in 1929, just weeks before the stock market crash that would plunge the nation into the Great Depression, it was a breathtaking declaration of confidence. The design by architects Fellheimer and Wagner was a masterclass in the modern, streamlined aesthetic of the era. Visitors arriving by car would first be dwarfed by the 15-story office tower, a sleek, vertical slash of brick and limestone that dominated the skyline. But the true awe awaited inside. Passing through the grand entrance, one stepped into the concourse, a cavernous, 5-story hall that stretched nearly the length of a football field. Its vaulted ceiling, adorned with intricate Art Deco medallions, seemed to soar into the heavens, while immense, arched windows flooded the vast space with a celestial light, illuminating the gleaming terrazzo floors and the hurried, hopeful crowds below. The heart of the entire complex was its four-faced clock, suspended from the center of the concourse ceiling. For decades, it was the official timepiece for thousands of Western New Yorkers, a reliable meeting point and a silent witness to a million hellos and goodbyes. The station was a self-contained city featuring a restaurant, a hospital, a dedicated nursery for traveling children, and even a powerful radio transmitter in its tower that could broadcast weather and news reports to trains approaching from miles away. For 30 glorious years, the terminal thrived as the vibrant, pulsating heart of Buffalo. It was a place of intense emotion where soldiers kissed their sweethearts farewell before departing for war, and families were reunited in tearful, joyful embraces. The sound of hissing steam, the chug of diesel engines, and the echoing call of station announcements formed the constant soundtrack of progress and connection. But the mid-20th century brought a hurricane of change that the massive station could not weather. The interstate highway system and the democratization of air travel began to siphon passengers away from the rails. The New York Central Railroad, struggling financially, merged with its former rival in 1968 to form the beleaguered Penn Central, which had little interest in maintaining a palace it no longer needed. On October 28, 1979, the last passenger train, the Lake Shore Limited, pulled out of the station. The gates were chained shut, the grand clock was stopped, and the magnificent concourse fell into a profound silence from which it has never fully awakened. What followed was a half-century of brutal decay that nearly proved terminal. The abandoned complex became a target for relentless vandalism and scavengers. Copper wire was ripped from the walls, the beautiful brass fixtures were stolen for scrap, and the magnificent terrazzo floors were stained by rain pouring in through a shattered roof. The elements took a devastating toll. Freezing winters caused pipes to burst, and decades of water infiltration weakened walls and ceilings. The city of Buffalo, which had taken possession due to back taxes, had no use for the white elephant and no funds for its upkeep. It became a favorite canvas for graffiti artists and a destination for urban explorers brave enough to navigate its dark, crumbling hallways, their photographs documenting a heartbreaking descent into ruin. The towering office building, its windows blown out, stood as a skeletal reminder of past grandeur against the Great Lakes sky. Demolition seemed not just likely, but inevitable, as the cost of tearing it down was repeatedly weighed against the seemingly impossible dream of restoration. But the story of the Buffalo Central Terminal is not one of finality. It is a story of tenacious, unwavering hope, a testament to the power of community love for a place. In the 1990s, a small group of dedicated citizens, refusing to let their landmark die, formed the Buffalo Central Terminal Restoration Corporation. They began the Herculean task of reclaiming the building from the abyss, one painstaking step at a time. Their work began with basic stabilization, patching the massive roof to stop the devastating water intrusion, boarding up broken windows, and slowly clearing out mountains of debris and graffiti. Funding this mammoth effort has been a constant challenge, relying on grants, donations, and the sheer force of volunteerism. Thousands of hours have been donated by local tradespeople, historians, and ordinary Buffalonians who simply believe in the terminal's future. Their progress, though slow, is miraculous. They have successfully restored the magnificent concourse clock to its former glory, its four faces now telling accurate time once more. They have brought back power to parts of the building and have begun meticulously restoring historic spaces, allowing the public to once again experience a glimpse of the station's lost elegance through curated tours and special events. The terminal is no longer a silent ruin. It now hosts weddings, concerts, festivals, and even an annual charity run through its historic halls, slowly weaving itself back into the fabric of the city's life. The journey is far from over. The restoration is a marathon measured in decades, not years. Yet the Buffalo Central Terminal stands today as a powerful symbol of Rust Belt resilience, a magnificent ghost given a second chance by the people who refuse to forget its grandeur, proving that even the most profound silence can be broken by the determined sound of hammers and hope. While the historic terminals and housing projects told stories of communities and transportation, our next landmark was a temple built for a different kind of American religion, sports. In the 1970s, cities across the nation were embracing a new kind of architecture, the massive, donut-shaped, multi-purpose concrete stadium. These utilitarian behemoths were designed to be all things to all people, hosting both baseball and football with brutal efficiency. And in Seattle, the king of them all was the Kingdome. When it opened in 1976 after years of delays and political wrangling, it was a marvel of modern engineering. Its vast white roof was the largest freestanding concrete dome in the world, a smooth, imposing hemisphere that dominated the city's skyline like a landed alien spacecraft. For a city eager to prove its major league credentials with the new Seahawks of the NFL and the Mariners of Major League Baseball, the Kingdome was a potent symbol of arrival. Stepping inside was an assault on the senses. The playing field was sunk far below street level, and the seating bowl was so steep and so vast that fans in the highest rows, nicknamed the nosebleed seats, felt like they were watching the action through the wrong end of a telescope. But the most defining characteristic of the Kingdome was its sound. When the Seahawks defense took the field on a third down, or when a Mariners hitter like Ken Griffey Jr. came to the plate with runners on base, the roar of the crowd would become trapped under that immense hard concrete roof. The sound would reverberate, amplifying and building upon itself into a deafening, continuous wall of noise that could literally rattle your ribs. This phenomenon reached its legendary peak with the Kingdome boom. During particularly explosive moments, the collective shout of over 60,000 fans would create a concussive shockwave so powerful it would register on the seismographs at the University of Washington. Players on the field would talk about feeling the vibration in their helmets, a physical manifestation of the city's passion that became the stadium's defining and most beloved feature. Yet, for all its roaring glory, the Kingdome was built on a foundation of compromise and, as it turned out, flawed construction. The very design that made it so loud also made it a difficult place to watch baseball, with many seats facing the wrong direction and terrible sightlines. But the real problems were structural. In the summer of 1994, during a routine inspection, a stadium worker made a terrifying discovery. A section of the acoustic ceiling tiles, each a 4-pound wafer of sound-dampening material, had fallen nearly 200 feet from the dome's interior roof onto the seats below. The culprit was a combination of factors: the constant, thunderous vibrations from the crowd noise, and the humidity from the damp Seattle air that seeped in and weakened the adhesive holding the tiles in place. The discovery forced the immediate closure of the stadium. The Mariners had to finish their season on a bizarre, months-long road trip, a circumstance that ironically helped save baseball in Seattle by building a national wave of sympathy for the team. Extensive investigations revealed the problem was far worse than anyone imagined. Nearly a third of the 25,000 ceiling tiles were deemed unstable and in danger of falling. The entire roof would need to be resurfaced, a repair job with a staggering price tag estimated at over $100 million. The crisis forced a monumental civic debate. Should they pour a fortune into repairing the 20-year-old, already outdated concrete bowl, or was this a once-in-a-generation opportunity to start fresh? The argument for implosion won. It was decided that rather than sink money into a flawed, multi-purpose compromise, Seattle would build 2 new, state-of-the-art, sport-specific stadiums, an open-air ballpark for the Mariners and a dedicated football stadium for the Seahawks. On a cloudy Sunday morning in March 2000, a crowd of thousands gathered to watch the end of an era. With a series of precise explosions, the massive dome shuddered, then collapsed inward upon itself, vanishing into a colossal plume of gray dust that blanketed the city. The implosion was swift, efficient, and final. In its place now stand T-Mobile Park and Lumen Field, two beautiful and functional venues that perfectly suit their sports. The kingdom's demise was not a tragic loss of a beloved treasure, but a pragmatic decision to trade a loud, flawed, but unforgettable relic for a brighter, more sophisticated future. But long before the railroads, the steel mills, or even the first European explorers set foot on the continent, a different kind of American metropolis rose from the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River. Around the year 1000, the great city of Cahokia, located in what is now southern Illinois just across the river from St. Louis, was at its zenith. It was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, a sprawling, sophisticated urban center that was home to as many as 20,000 people. At its heart stood the magnificent Monk's Mound, the largest earthen pyramid in the Americas, a towering platform that supported the temples and homes of the city's elites. But the true genius of Cahokia's inhabitants, known as the Mississippian culture, extended beyond their engineering prowess and into the very heavens themselves. Their deep understanding of the cosmos is best exemplified by a lost landmark that has been painstakingly recreated, the Cahokia Woodhenge. The original Woodhenge was not built of stone, like its famous namesake in England, but of massive, towering red cedar posts arranged in a wide circle hundreds of feet across. This was not a random arrangement of logs. It was a precision-engineered astronomical observatory and a complex solar calendar. The key to its function was a single, central observation post. On the morning of the equinox, an astronomer priest standing at this post would watch the sun rise directly over a specific marker post in the circle, signaling a day of perfect balance between light and dark. At the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun would rise in perfect alignment with a different post, while the winter solstice sunrise would align with yet another. This allowed the Cahokians to track the passing seasons with remarkable accuracy, dictating the optimal times for planting and harvest, and scheduling the elaborate religious ceremonies that were central to their society. The discovery of this ancient wonder was almost as remarkable as the structure itself. For centuries, the true purpose of the circular patterns of post holes, which were all that remained buried in the soil, was a complete mystery. It wasn't until the 1960s that an archaeologist named Warren Whitry, who was also a skilled astronomer, began to piece together the celestial puzzle. By carefully mapping the positions of the excavated post molds and calculating their alignment with the horizon, he realized he was looking at the remains of a sophisticated solar calendar. His work completely revolutionized our understanding of the Mississippian people, proving they were not just mound builders, but also accomplished sky watchers whose intellectual achievements rivaled those of any contemporary civilization in the world. The Woodhenge we can visit today at the Cahokia Mound State Historic Site is a modern reconstruction, a powerful interpretation based on Whitry's archaeological findings. The cedar posts that stand there now are replacements, sunk into the exact locations of the original post holes to recreate the experience of this ancient calendar. While the wood is new, the alignments are ancient and remain breathtakingly precise. On a clear morning during a solstice or equinox, visitors can gather to witness the same celestial spectacle that the Cahokians did 1,000 years ago, a direct and visceral connection to the past. This makes the Cahokia Woodhenge a unique kind of landmark on our list. It wasn't lost to fire, demolition, or decay in the traditional sense. Its wooden pillars vanished centuries ago, rotting back into the earth from which they came. What was truly lost was the knowledge of its existence and purpose, erased by the collapse of the Cahokia civilization and the passage of time. Its recovery through archaeology and its thoughtful reconstruction is a testament to our enduring effort to understand the profound intellectual legacy of America's first great city, a silent stone circle that once spoke volumes about the movement of the sun and the wisdom of the people who watched it. Perched precariously over the churning Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic City Steel Pier was a kingdom of the bizarre and the spectacular, a place where the boundaries of belief were tested daily. And from the 1920s through the 1970s, its single most breathtaking, heart-stopping attraction was not a roller coaster or a stage show, but a feat so audacious it defied all reason: the high-diving horse. This was not a mere stunt. It was a sublime, terrifying ballet of girl and horse, a momentary fusion of trust and terror that captivated millions. The setup was as simple as it was terrifying. A tall, 40-foot wooden tower was constructed, its summit holding a narrow, downward-sloping ramp just wide enough for a horse to traverse. At the end of this ramp was a small platform, and beyond that, a 10-foot-long tank of water waiting below. The performance was brutally straightforward. A young woman, usually dressed in a bathing suit, would sit side-saddle on the back of a specially trained horse. At a signal, the horse would be spurred to gallop up the enclosed ramp inside the tower. Bursting out into the open air at the top, the animal would immediately plunge down the steeply angled slide and launch itself off the platform into the void, with the rider holding on tight as they fell the equivalent of 4 stories into the small pool with an enormous soaking splash. The spectacle was an instant and enduring sensation. For audiences, it represented the ultimate dare, the pinnacle of courage. The act was a perfect storm of drama: the powerful, muscular beauty of the horse, the grace and bravery of the female rider, and the ever-present, spine-tingling risk of a tragic miscalculation. It was promoted as the most spectacular act ever presented, and few who witnessed it would have argued. The pier's promoters understood its primal appeal perfectly. It was an event that had to be seen to be believed. The act ran multiple times a day, and each performance drew gigantic, gasping crowds who would crane their necks skyward, their hearts lodged in their throats, waiting for that incredible moment of flight. For the young women who performed the dive, like the most famous rider, Sonora Webster, it was a job that demanded absolute fearlessness and a profound, almost spiritual connection with their equine partner. They trained for years, developing a technique to lean back at the precise moment of impact to avoid being slammed forward into the horse's neck, or worse, being thrown off entirely. The horses themselves, typically sturdy geldings like the famed Lightning, were trained through patient conditioning, learning to associate the dive with a reward of food and affection waiting for them after they swam to the edge of the tank. The magic of the act, however, was always shadowed by controversy and danger. While promoters and trainers insisted the horses were not harmed and were willing participants, animal rights activists, even in those less enlightened times, voiced strong objections. They argued that the forced plunge, the jarring impact with the water, and the inherent stress of the performance were forms of cruelty, no matter how well the animals were treated otherwise. The risk to the riders was equally, if not more, apparent. In 1931, tragedy nearly struck Sonora Webster. During a dive, she failed to lean back in time, and the force of the impact drove her eyes open against the water, causing a detached retina that left her permanently blind. In a display of almost superhuman fortitude, Webster did not retire. She continued to perform the dive for another 11 years, relying entirely on muscle memory and her feel for the horse's movements, a fact that only added to the act's legendary and troubling mystique. By the 1970s, the cultural landscape had shifted dramatically. A growing public consciousness about animal welfare, combined with skyrocketing insurance costs and a new, more litigious society, placed the ancient spectacle under intense scrutiny. The act that had once been hailed as the height of entertainment was now increasingly viewed as a dangerous, exploitative anachronism. The final dive took place in 1978, not with a dramatic accident but with a quiet cancellation. The owners of the steel pier, facing immense pressure and realizing the act no longer fit the modern world, simply retired the horses. The towering platform was dismantled, the water tank drained, and one of the most singularly strange and thrilling acts in the history of American entertainment vanished forever. The high diving horse remains a powerful, complicated symbol of a bygone era, a time of raw, unchoreographed spectacle where the line between breathtaking courage and sheer recklessness was as thin as the platform from which they leaped, a lost icon of a time when wonder was worth any risk. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Tennessee River was a powerful, untamed, and often deadly force. For centuries, its swirling currents had carved a deep and winding path through the Cumberland Plateau. But one section was particularly notorious among riverboat pilots, a treacherous stretch known as the Tennessee Gorge, dominated by two lethal rapids called the Suck and the Skillet. Here, the river narrowed and dropped over 40 feet in just a few miles, creating a churning, unpredictable maelstrom of whirlpools and hidden rocks that had claimed countless boats and lives. It was a formidable barrier to commerce, isolating the city of Chattanooga and stifling the economic potential of the entire region. Taming this aquatic monster became an obsession for engineers and industrialists, a challenge that would require a monument of unprecedented scale and ambition. Their solution was the Hales Bar Dam, a project that would become one of the largest and most difficult civil engineering endeavors of its era, a testament to humanity's desire to bend nature to its will. The task of building this behemoth fell not to the federal government but to a private enterprise, the Chattanooga and Tennessee River Power Company. Their vision was twofold: to subdue the deadly rapids and create a safe, navigable channel for steamboats and barges, and to harness the river's immense power to generate electricity for the burgeoning industries of Chattanooga. The design was a massive undertaking, calling for a dam over 800 feet long that would stretch across the river, raising the water level behind it by more than 30 feet to drown the rapids forever. But the true challenge lay not in the scale of the concrete, but in the ground beneath it. Engineers soon discovered the riverbed was not solid rock, but a treacherous honeycomb of limestone, riddled with caves, fissures, and countless underwater channels. This porous karst geology was a nightmare scenario for a dam, which relies on a watertight seal to hold back the incredible pressure of a reservoir. Construction began in 1905 and immediately became a brutal 7-year battle against the river itself. To even begin pouring concrete, workers first had to construct massive cofferdams, temporary walls built to hold back the water and create a dry work site. But the river, flowing through its porous limestone bed, simply went under them. Crews would pump one section dry, only to watch water bubble up from the ground beneath their feet. The solution was as innovative as it was grueling. They began an extensive program of grouting, a process where workers would pump a thick slurry of concrete and other materials into the countless holes and fissures in the riverbed, attempting to plug the leaks from below. It was dangerous, painstaking work performed in murky, confined spaces, and it continued even as the massive dam itself began to rise. When the Hales Bar Dam was finally completed in 1913, it was hailed as a masterpiece of engineering ingenuity, a seeming victory of man over nature. Its power turbines hummed to life, and for the first time, steamboats could pass safely through the former gorge on a newly raised pool of water. Yet the river never truly surrendered. Almost from the day it opened, Hales Bar began to leak. It was a constant, expensive, and deeply worrying problem. The immense pressure of the reservoir forced water through the smallest, undiscovered cracks in the grouting, creating persistent seeps and flows that eroded the foundation from within. The private owners fought a continuous, losing battle against the leaks for decades, investing small fortunes in repair and remediation projects. The dam changed hands, eventually being purchased by the Tennessee Electric Power Company, but the fundamental flaw remained. The very geology it was built upon made it inherently unstable. The constant maintenance and the growing demand for even more power in the region eventually drew the attention of a new, far more powerful entity, the federal government's Tennessee Valley Authority. When the TVA was created in 1933 as part of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, its mission was to comprehensively develop the entire Tennessee Valley region through flood control, navigation, and massive electricity generation. The TVA surveyed the existing infrastructure and saw Hale's Bar for what it was: a heroic but flawed first attempt, a dam built on a fundamentally bad site. Instead of continuing the endless and expensive repair cycle, the TVA embarked on a much more ambitious project just 6 miles downstream, the Nickajack Dam. Completed in 1967, this modern, colossal structure was built on a solid limestone foundation designed to last for centuries. With Nickajack online, Hale's Bar was instantly rendered obsolete. The TVA closed its powerhouses and assumed control of the aging dam, now seeing it not as an asset but as a liability. For a time, the TVA maintained Hale's Bar as a navigation lock, but the persistent and worsening leaks could not be ignored. The cost of maintaining the two dams so close together was unjustifiable, and the risk of a catastrophic failure, however small, was too great. The decision was made: the river would be set free. In 2008, the TVA executed a carefully engineered plan to breach the dam. They did not use dramatic explosives, but instead employed heavy machinery to carefully notch a large section of the concrete structure. It was a deliberate, almost surgical procedure. As the notch deepened, the waters of the Tennessee River, held back for nearly a century, began to flow through the gap. Slowly at first, and then with gathering force, the river reclaimed its ancient course. The massive reservoir behind the dam gradually drained away, revealing the long-drowned landscape of the original riverbank, ghostly and surreal. By 2016, the breaching was complete. The suck and the skillet, the very rapids the dam was built to destroy, began to re-emerge from the silt as the river scoured its old channel, once again carving through the gorge with its ancient power. Today, all that remains of the Hale's Bar Dam are its silent, crumbling wing walls stretching partway into the river, a haunting ruin being slowly reclaimed by nature. Its breaching was a symbolic full circle, a rare instance where a monument of industrial might was not demolished for progress, but deliberately dismantled to allow a wild river to run free again, a quiet correction on the map that erased nearly a century of history. And so, our journey across a hidden America draws to a close, a map not of what is, but of what was. These 30 stories are more than just a catalogue of demolition and decay. They are a powerful testament to the relentless, ever-changing nature of the American landscape. We are a nation constantly in motion, building, tearing down, and rebuilding, often with little regard for the layers of history we pave over in our march toward progress. The forces that erased these places are as varied as the landmarks themselves. The cold, hard calculus of real estate economics, the unpredictable fury of nature, the shifting sands of public taste, and sometimes simply the slow, silent, and inevitable wear of time. What emerges from these tales is a profound sense of bittersweet loss, not just for the bricks and mortar, but for the memories they held, the communities they fostered, and the unique character they lent to the American story. Each empty lot, each modern building standing on hallowed ground, each quiet field is a palimpsest with the ghost of what came before whispering just beneath the surface. This constant cycle of creation and erasure asks us a crucial question: what is the true cost of progress? Is it measured only in new square footage and increased tax revenue, or should we also account for the intangible loss of beauty, of shared memory, and of a tangible connection to those who came before us? The demolition of Penn Station taught us that lesson the hard way, sparking a preservation movement that has saved countless treasures since, but the fight is never over. It requires vigilance, passion, and a collective voice that values history over pure utility. The next time you walk through your own city or town, I encourage you to look a little closer. Peek down that alleyway, notice the older building tucked between glossy new skyscrapers, and ask what stories its walls could tell. That local movie theater, the old diner, the neighborhood factory, they are the landmarks of your community's story, and they are just as vulnerable to the pressures of change. Support your local historical societies, champion preservation efforts, and become a steward of the history that is all around you, often hiding in plain sight. This exploration of our forgotten past doesn't have to end here. The history we've uncovered together is just a fraction of what's been lost. Now I want to hear from you. In the comments below, share your own stories. Tell me about the landmarks from your hometown that have vanished. The drive-in theater now buried under a strip mall. The department store with the magical Christmas display that's long gone. The old swimming hole that was paved over for a highway. Your memories are the living history that keeps these places alive. Let's build a collective archive of remembrance right here. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the shadows of American history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have so many more forgotten stories to uncover, from vanished roadside attractions to ghost towns and hidden histories waiting to be told. Together, let's keep exploring the extraordinary tales of the places we've lost, ensuring that even in their absence, they are never truly forgotten.